Lower Manhattan. Have you done an experiment that says this is going to work, or are you flying blind?
Well, I think you did the experiment last time following the great financial crisis. The Fed shrunk its balance sheet, and we had that experience in 2019 where they shrank it a little too much.
Right.
So they're going to learn from that episode and not do the things that they did last time. Last time, they never slowed the rate of asset runoff. They never stopped the asset runoff prior to the reserves becoming scarce. And I think this time, and they didn't have a standing repo facility. So I think this time they have sort of a belt and suspenders, and they didn't have either a belt or suspenders last time.
So they've belts and suspenders for a problem that won't necessarily repeat itself. But where are the belt and suspenders for a dollar getting too strong for the rest of the world to really sustain its momentum?
Well, this is a problem always, that the Fed follows monetary policy based on what's best for the United States, and the consequences of the rest of the world are the consequences for the rest of the world. And a strong dollar is one of the consequences of the Fed tightening monetary policy now quite aggressively. The Fed actually wants the dollar to be relatively firm because a stronger dollar restrains economic activity, and it reduces inflation because it reduces the cost of imports into the United States. So the Fed is not unhappy with the dollar strength. This is just part and parcel, one aspect of how you tighten financial conditions.
Oh, you take.
So good gains for Japanese markets, as of course, as brilliant opinion columnist and senior advisor to Bloomberg Economics, Bill Dudley, or William Dudley.
Yeah.
A few headlines coming out of Japan. We got Fumio Kishida apparently looking at individual travel for tourists, according to the Fuji News Network.
Yes, and they may decide that as early as this week. Might include things like okaying individual travel, interest, visa waivers. They had talked about this already, or at least reports suggestive that you might be able to go to Japan without being in a group. So we'll see what happens. We've certainly seen the market react to this already.
Yeah, this is what we have. And market also reaction to events literally on the battlefield in Eastern Europe. Let's get more on that story and the rest of the First Word News with Von Equin now in New York.
Yes, thanks, Rish. Ukraine's forces have reportedly continued their rapid advance in the Kharkiv region, exploiting an extraordinary collapse of Russian defences. Unconfirmed reports suggest Kyiv's troops have taken a key town not far from the Russia-Ukraine border. Russia's defence ministry, meanwhile, published a map showing much of the country's forces out of the Kharkiv region without commenting further. A new opinion poll suggests the majority of Thais are dissatisfied with Deputy Prime Minister Prawit Wongsuwan acting as Premier. The survey comes ahead of a general election expected early next year in which Prawit has emerged as a contender. Prawit became acting Prime Minister in late August after Prayut Chan-o-cha was suspended over a term limit debate. U.S. freight railroads will reportedly reduce services starting Monday after two of the country's largest rail unions failed to agree on a new contract. The Journal of Commerce says railroads have been notifying customers about the service cuts ahead of a possible strike on September 17th. Two unions representing more than 90,000 rail workers are holding out for better working conditions. China plans to launch 3 unmanned missions to the moon over the next 10 years. The announcement came a day after Beijing said it had discovered a new lunar mineral that contains helium-3, an isotope that may be a future energy source. Both China and the US are eyeing the moon's resources, with space mining shaping up to potentially be a source of tension. Global news, 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bonnie Quinn. This is Bloomberg. Rish.
That's Ronnie. Right, a rapid cool down in real estate threatening to worsen a global economic downturn and emerging as a key variable for central bankers who want to really tap down inflation.
Yep, let's bring in our personal finance editor here, Ainsley Thompson, to talk us through today's big take here. Yeah, I mean, there's some markets in the world that are more vulnerable to higher rates. You know, you look at floating rates, for example, as a percentage of total mortgages out there. You know, what's the type of squeeze we're seeing and where are we seeing the worst of it?
Well, the squeeze we're seeing is both on buyers who are being put off buying because of the higher interest rate, so that's cooling the house prices. And then, as you say, on owners, house owners who may be on variable rates or have a fixed term, but which is a short fixed term, so it has to be renewed in the next couple of years. In the US, we typically don't see many people on these variable rates. Most people have mortgages which last for 30 years, as much as 30 years. In other countries like Australia, the UK, Canada, Canada, New Zealand, where I am, a lot of people are on variable rates or these fixed-term rates which only last for a couple of years and then you have to renew. In New Zealand, I think it's 55% of people are either on variable rates or they have to renew in the next year. So there will be a lot of pain as people come onto these higher interest rates and some bout tightening as well.
So, Angel, I mean, what is the effect of this squeeze? I mean, are we expecting this thing to get worse? What's the deal?
The effect of the squeeze, I think, will be on consumer sentiment, will be cooling as people, have to, as I said, tighten their belts. One thing we don't expect to see is a whole lot of defaults on mortgages. At the moment, households' balance sheets are still really quite strong and they have a lot of savings. And the real saving grace is the labour market, which in most countries is still very robust. And also, since the the global financial crisis, lending requirements have been tightened a lot, which means most people have been stress tested to make sure they can withstand these higher rates.
Okay, now I guess this next question on how exposed are borrowers to higher rates, I think it depends really, to your earlier point, I think you alluded to this, where you actually ask that question.
Absolutely. As I said, the US is less exposed. Countries like Australia, Canada, the UK even are far more exposed. Fitch did a report earlier this year and it found that Australia, Canada, the UK and Spain in 2020 had a very high rate of people taking on these variable rate mortgages.
Ainsley Thompson there, our personal finance editor there. Now, a little bit more here on this news out of Tokyo, out of the Fuji News Network that we were talking about here with Rish, that Japan is allowing, not so much deciding on that just yet, foreign visitors to travel in Japan freely on the back of, I guess, several news reports, almost saying as much here, Rish.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. And that is the end at the moment. We just watch this space, in other words. We have an exclusive discussion coming up next with Microsoft Asia President Ahmed Mazari about the software giant's vision and ambition for this part of the world. All that and more. This is Bloomberg.
Apollo is helping to drive a more sustainable future. Across our platform, we have deployed more than $19 billion in climate capital. And in the next 5 years, we aim to deploy over $50 billion more.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
When U.S. inflation numbers are released,
a major drop in the headline number,
Bloomberg brings you crucial data at terminal speed.
Yields dramatically lower, futures dramatically higher.
A strong rally. Bam. People are going full risk on.
And instant expert analysis.
At what point does the Fed signal we're done?
The market's not believing that the Fed has yet done enough. One report is not all it's going to take.
When do we get back to boring inflation?
Nobody covers the economy like Bloomberg, your global business authority. When U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg brings you crucial data at terminal speed and instant expert analysis. Nobody covers jobs day like Bloomberg.
There we go. Just checking the Southeast Asian markets, all on the upside. As you can see, the Bursa Malaysia, they're barely at the moment in positive terrain, but certainly Manila. There, you can tell us more about that, I'm sure, David.
Yeah, I know a little bit something, of course, about that. I mean, we're looking ahead now. Sticking in ASEAN here. Let's get it over to Singapore. Our co-anchor Haslinda Amin is standing by there with our next guest, Has.
Well, Dave, Asia's economic growth has been driven significantly by the region's transformation into being a factory for the world. Now, Microsoft says it's seeing a fundamental shift from made in Asia to being born born in Asia. Ahmed Mazari is Microsoft's Asia president, joins us exclusively. Ahmed, good to have you with us. You're first with us. Hope to see you more regularly from here. We talk about born in Asia. Obviously, you're talking about the startups here in the Southeast Asian space. How is that moving the needle for you meaningfully?
Thank you for having me. Southeast Asia and Asia across the board is the hub of startup activity. Up to 41% startups are in Asia. And just behind the US, 34% startup investments came into Asia, just a point behind the US. So it's pretty significant.
Significant, but it is, I guess we're at a time when everything is slowing down. We're expecting a global recession. Asia, Southeast Asia, will not be spared.
We have a very unique opportunity as Microsoft in this world today, where we're actually building digital perseverance to ensure that companies become resilient. And we're seeing tech grow as a percentage of GDP from 5% at the start of the decade to 10%. So we see continued opportunity for digital enablement.
So is there a particular sector that's putting in a lot more money and a lot more investments into technology and to advancing their capabilities?
I'll share with you two quick examples. I was in Japan very recently, and Kawasaki, which is a core manufacturing company, is using Microsoft's HoloLens and using digital twinning to create productivity. SMBC, which is another bank in Japan, is working in Southeast Asia to create green financing. It's all an opportunity to enable, to create a resilient economy in the future.
How are you seeing it in terms of what's happening in China? I mean, massive slowdown, much slower than most had anticipated. Is that impacting the kind of investment that companies are putting into technology?
We've been in China for about 2.5 decades, and we have about 20,000 employees. It continues to be an important market for us. But back to your earlier point about investments for the future, at the core, we believe that tech will enable the world for progress. And 150 million tech jobs are likely to be created by the end of 2025. And that means opportunity for societal progress. That means opportunity for industries.
Look, let's just have a look at one thing which has been a buzzword, and it's trying to bring resilience to corporates. Give us some real examples of how you do that through digitization.
We're investing up to $20 billion in cybersecurity, and we monitor 43 trillion signals a day. And as a company, we're ensuring that we invest our best and brightest to help secure industries, to help secure societies. And therefore, cyber and cyber resilience is one of the most important and live and contemporary examples of what you just asked.
Ahmed, David here. Now, I just want to understand then, so the focus in startups, born in Asia, as you point out, and I'm just curious what the Microsoft offering is to smaller companies that might, let's be frank, might not be able to afford some of your services.
Oh, David, that's a fantastic question. It energizes me the most, actually. I just was in Korea a few days back, and we launched what is called Microsoft Launcher. Microsoft Launcher ensures that we provide startups with not only their ability to collaborate, not only their ability to be on Azure, not only on Teams for driving expansion, or for Dynamics 365, our entire product suite. We actually offer up to $300,000 credit. It's part of Founders Hub. And what is most exciting is in Korea, we've partnered with people to offer space for smaller companies to come and put the developers in. We're also aligning them with M12, our investment fund, where startups can go and pitch for early equity.
Geopolitics always gets in the way, and we know that you're one of the biggest US companies in China. For instance, you talk about investing in the startup space. I'm just wondering, with the Biden administration planning more curbs in terms of investments in Chinese companies, I mean, how are you viewing it all?
Astinda, going back to where I started, which is this whole notion of digital perseverance, we're continuing to work with companies to ensure that they're prepared for the future. We're preparing them in terms of cyber resilience, we're preparing them on cloud infrastructure, we're preparing them with data, we're preparing them with AI. And we find ourselves in a bigger role in the future across most of Asia.
Before we let you go, the biggest risk that you see out there, you seem pretty optimistic that Microsoft can overcome all the challenges despite the anticipated global slowdown. What's the biggest risk out there for you?
I think what we really have to pay attention towards is, can we find the people, skill them, motivate them, and keep them engaged in a hybrid environment? This is a perfect example of a hybrid environment, and I think we're all learning.
Ahmed, thank you so much for your time today. Ahmed Mazari, Microsoft's Asia President. Plenty more ahead. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Cooling. You will be the first chief crypto officer. Because when you subscribe to Bloomberg, you won't just get news. You'll get insight into limitless possibilities, knowledge, and inspiration to feed your ambition. So before you invent, pioneer, disrupt, before you change the world, Bloomberg.
I think that it's hard to put your head around any narrative. Let's just be honest. We've had sort of a shift in, are we in some sort of stagflation fears moment? People were talking about that all day yesterday.
Yeah, you're back with Bloomberg Markets. We're going to have a look at the latest business flash headlines. Looking at Fernando Zobel de Ayala resigning, is that right?
Yep, yeah. Perfect.
Resigning as president and CEO of the Philippine conglomerate Ayala Corporation. This is effective immediately. Zobel has been on medical leave since August. He has also resigned from roles in the company's various units, including Ayala Land and BPI. Cesar Consing was named acting president and CEO last month. The French power distributor Strasbourg Electricity oversold large quantities of electricity due to trading errors earlier last week. It's a mistake that could cost the company over $60 million. The company is saying that it made quantity errors on transactions Tuesday and Wednesday, and the costs coming from rebalancing and volume adjustment operations. Tesla, it's rolling out its new beta version of its autopilot system, which it calls Full Self-Driving, or FSD. CEO Elon Musk tweeted that the version is overly cautious, especially around pedestrians. Last month, Musk announced that Tesla will start charging $15,000 for the driver assistance system. That's the second price rise this year.
Okay, let's recap some of the breaking news out of Tokyo. This is out of the Fuji News Network, of course, talking about the possibility that Japan will be allowing foreign tourists to go and travel to Japan individually. You don't need to go through a travel agency, and that decision might come as early as this week, and we could be looking at possibly October. That news, and as you can see, in the morning session, we had some airlines moving through. And also, just very briefly, on the European FX front, of course, on the back of Ukraine here.
On the back of Ukraine there, and hawkish comments coming from the Bundesbank president as well there, Mr. Nagel. There we go. We see them against the crosses in Eastern Europe. There you go. This is Bloomberg.
VK ฟิล์มรถยนต์เกรดสูงกันน็อตสูงสุด 76%.
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's a community of global leaders and innovators who are blazing new trails to transform business and government. This platform will help them share their ideas with the world and provide access to the resources they need to bring them to life. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Today, what are the biggest challenges for General Dynamics and what are the biggest opportunities?
So I think in any business, the challenges are solving complex problems that come to you. You know, the problems that come to me and my senior leadership team for resolving tend to be highly complex and nettlesome. So your ability to solve those complex problems are an important element, I think, of the value that we add to the company. And then I think opportunities, you always want to make sure that you've got a creative enough mind, an open enough mind to be able to see around square corners. What am I missing? You know, the why questions are really powerful. Why are we not doing this, or why are we doing this? I ask those questions a lot, and in the answers, you can sometimes tease out some real opportunities, some hidden things. But thinking creatively about opportunities and problems is really important.
And what about the industry generally? Do you think they have big challenges now as the defense budget probably comes down a bit?
So I think that we are all responsible and we have an obligation to find the latest and best technologies that we can for our customers and deliver them in the most cost-effective manner we can. And I think that that's a challenge and an opportunity for all of the big defense companies.
Is it possible the industry is in an arms race that will lead to spending itself into an oversupply? I mean, that has happened before.
You know, we've looked at this very carefully, and the digitization of everything. Tell me what aspect of your life, Emily, isn't becoming more digital?
Well, I'm trying to prevent that, but yes, I think it's happening.
And COVID has accelerated that. The industry cost $500 billion last year, the semiconductor industry overall, and estimates are $1 trillion, a doubling by the end of the decade at that point. I believe those estimates. And it's not that there's not going to be some blips and turns on the way, and the majority of that is driven by leadership process technology, of which only 3 companies can satisfy that need.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance. Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people, the transactions, and the technology. Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
It is almost 11 a.m. in Singapore and Shanghai. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets Asia. I'm Haslinda Amin.
I'm Rashad Salamat in Hong Kong. Let's have a look at our top stories. We've got Asian shares climbing, got the dollar weakening, all ahead of a U.S. inflation reading that may not deter the Federal Reserve from further outsized interest rate hikes. Investors are also weighing the potential impact of Ukraine's counter-offensive as its forces advance into the Kharkiv region. Plus, discussing Russia's moves to sell more energy to India. Going to do that with the chairman of state-owned electricity trader PTC.
Well, in the markets, it's low volume given that it is a holiday in China, in Hong Kong, in South Korea as well. But Asian stocks getting a lift from that easing dollar, lifting sentiment, even though there is a risk coming that CPI out of the U.S. expected to remain elevated at 8%, despite it easing from that 9.5 level, which we saw previously. Take a look where we are in terms of those benchmarks. Pretty much gains across the board. The Nikkei 225 higher by 1% as well, though the yen itself is on the decline after that 1% gain that we saw on Friday. In the FX space, yes, it is about the weakening dollar, but it is also about the news out of Ukraine regaining its key territory. That's lifting the likes of the currencies in the Czech Republic as well as in Poland. And in the commodity space, Rich, we're seeing some pressure on the likes of WTI crude down about 1.5%. It is about concerns to do with the recession, given how aggressive central banks are right now. In the bond market, well, it is a mixed picture. We have yields climbing in Indonesia as well as in Singapore. Bear in mind, 2-year yields, Treasury 2-year yields, still at the highest level in 15 years.
Let's have a look at the open in Thailand, having a look at what's going on with the SEP now, because the stock exchange ended up there, as you can see, about 0.5%. Now, the baht actually weakening against a weaker dollar and seeing it just about 0.25% down against its American counterpart. Nifty looking like it's going to be opening with a slight gain there, flat picture being drawn, currency stable. We've got the rupee appreciating to 79 rupees 58 paisa. But if we have a look at the SET itself, one IPO taking place from a food packaging company called Chin Hui. It's up 45% on its debut. There you go.
Well, Rish, Ukraine's forces have reportedly continued their rapid advance in the Kharkiv region, exploiting an extraordinary collapse of Russian defenses and raising the question of how far they can go. Bloomberg, Sue Keenan joins us now. Sue, what's the latest?
Well, this appears to be the biggest victory for Ukraine forces since they succeeded in keeping Russia from advancing into Kyiv back in March. The past few days are being described as some of the most consequential in this now 200-day-old conflict. And Russia, over the weekend, published a map showing much of the country's forces out of the Kharkiv region. We do know that Russia has confirmed that thousands of Russian troops retreated in the face of a lightning Ukrainian offensive that has the potential, many are now saying, to derail the Kremlin's big effort to take control of the Ukraine's eastern part of the country. This appears, again, to be Ukraine's biggest victory yet. Ukraine's forces have continued their rapid advance into the Kharkiv region. You're looking at some of the abandoned equipment. One commander tweeted out that the Russians retreated with such speed that they left half their equipment behind. According to the Ukraine's top commander, quote, "We are starting to advance not only to the south and to the east in the Kharkiv areas, but also to the north." Now, observers are saying Ukraine's troops have clearly demonstrated their ability to conduct a major counteroffensive and change the course of the conflict. You're looking at video that was released just within the last 24 hours. Importantly, all of this is occurring ahead of a difficult winter for the European allies, supporting Kyiv's war effort with weapons and cash. So again, it appears to be a turn of events. A lot of what's coming to us are from blog details, unconfirmed reports, but there is enough support, particularly in the video that's now coming out, to indicate that this is indeed a change of events.
So, I mean, ultimately, we see ebbs and flows in all wars. What's the significance of this latest advance, though, by Ukraine?
Well, first of all, observers are saying the turn of events happened very quickly, certainly quicker than Russia anticipated, but even the Ukrainians appear to be surprised at the speed with which their efforts have succeeded. That was a victory flag planted by the Ukrainians in the Kharkiv region. And again, you're looking at some of the tanks and other other equipment that were left behind by the Russians. The goal of the Ukrainians themselves had been to sever critical supply lines and leave any attempt to sweep Russian forces out of that region until 2023. So they appear way ahead of schedule there. And their advances now present the Ukrainian commanders and leaders with some tough decisions as they decide when to halt the advance, what moves to make next. One expert on war strategy says that when you're pursuing an enemy that is broken, there's always a significant risk that you become outstretched and expose your flanks. But this is a war that grabbed the world's attention 200 some days ago, and then within a month or two fell out of the headlines. This weekend of events where it appears the Ukrainians have really been able to push back a significant element of the Russian troops is now gaining once again a lot of attention from the world. Back to you.
Sue, good stuff. Thanks to Sue Keenan there from New York, getting us up to date with the latest situation in Ukraine. Let's also just see how that's actually emboldened some of these traders for the euro, and there's a bit of euro optimism taking place. It has somewhat, at the moment, gone away, but certainly it is against this backdrop of a US dollar, which has been weak and continues to be so for the time being. Chief Rates Correspondent for Asia's Garfield Reynolds. And Garfield, I think you wrote in your latest piece, or missive, should I say, that this was, and you used the word transitory before we resume dollar strength.
Well, that's certainly potentially the case, Rich. A lot will hinge on US CPI due Tuesday in New York, and especially might be some perhaps too much focus on the headline CPI, which is expected to slow to a mere 8% or so. But for the Fed, the key may well be the core CPI. That's expected to accelerate. And we know that the Fed is almost certainly going to go by 75 basis points again. So the question becomes whether or not that 75 basis point represents the high watermark for Fed aggression, or if they're going to keep going hard and they're going to keep talking about taking the rate ever higher. A lot then depends on how the Fed responds to whatever the CPI brings. There's also that wild card for a number of currencies, but especially the euro, which is the most traded currency against the dollar, of what is going on in the Russia-Ukraine war. Does Ukraine's apparent battleground success mean you're optimistic because we might get towards a conclusion of the war, or does it mean you're pessimistic because Russia might then be more willing to cut energy supplies off from Europe to a greater extent than it already has? So there's a lot to be keeping an eye on there. For the moment, the dollar has had a pause. It's paused after the last three big run-ups, and then each time it came back up, not completely coincidentally, because the Fed made it clear they're not done with being aggressive on monetary policy to quash inflation. So if the Fed maintains that stance, there's a pretty good chance that, yes, this dollar pause will be a short one.
So dollar weakness may be transitory, but yen weakness unlikely to be, yes? I mean, given that the BOJ keeps on insisting that it wants to keep policy easy.
Yeah, well, I mean, the view from Kuroda, the BOJ governor, has been that the inflation they've been seeing in Japan so far has been transitory, not sustainable due to supply shocks, and that therefore he's not willing to countenance as yet you're slowing down that uber easy policy, and therefore you're bringing Japanese policy closer or less far away from the Fed. So with that backdrop, the yen is open to fresh declines, especially because so far all that's come out of Japan that might reverse the trend is just rhetoric, which is a contrast with Europe, where they have hiked rates and talked about hiking rates very strongly again. So the euro is looking a lot more solid than the yen is from here, even though both Europe and Japan face economic challenges. The challenge for the yen is that it also faces the world's most uber dovish central bank.
The yen, 142.79. Bloomberg's chief rates correspondent for Asia, Garfield Reynolds, thank you. Now let's get the first word news with Vonnie Quinn in New York. Hey, Vonnie.
Hey, Haslinda, thanks and good morning. The Biden administration reportedly plans to broaden curbs on U.S. shipments to China of semiconductors used for artificial intelligence and chip making. Reuters cites unidentified sources saying the Commerce Department plans to publish new regulations next month. The rules would codify restrictions already communicated to companies including NVIDIA, AMD, and KLA. Officials in Beijing say a top school has seen a COVID outbreak, and that outbreak should be stamped out as soon as possible. The Communication University of China was put under lockdown on Friday, and 6 cases have been confirmed there. In the Xinjiang region, authorities have apologized for shortages of food and medicine in areas subject to COVID lockdowns. Officials are strictly enforcing the COVID zero policy ahead of next month's Party Congress. Sweden's right-wing opposition has narrowly overtaken Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson's camp in an early vote count. The bloc that includes the Sweden Democrats is likely to gain 175 mandates in the 349-seat parliament versus 174 for the alliance led by the ruling Social Democrats. The result cements the ascent of a party previously shunned as extremist by the political establishment. Sources say Brazil's presidential frontrunner Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is likely to appoint his centrist running mate to a key cabinet position if elected. We're told Geraldo Alckmin could lead several important ministries, including finance or agriculture. Da Silva's alliance with Alckmin is seen as the biggest sign yet that da Silva is committed to a moderate political and economic agenda. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Vonnie Quinn. This is Bloomberg. Rish.
All right, well, still to come this hour, we've got state-owned electricity trader PTC India telling us how its bottom line is being affected by the surge we witnessed in commodity prices. Talking to the chairman and managing director, Rajiv Kumar Mishra, later this hour.
But just ahead, K2 Asset Management tells us why it believes the Fed's benchmark rate won't be hiked as high as suggested by some in the market. That's next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg.
Bell กับชุดสุดคุ้มเพียง99 บาทถึง31 สิงหาคมนี้เท่านั้น
While Teslas and the like make for good headlines, the reality is that even if every car on the roads today went electric, it wouldn't be enough to curb global emissions to avoid catastrophic climate change. Greenhouse gas emissions from transportation account for about 29% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. So what about the other 71%?
Buildings across America burn fossil fuels to operate. What we want to do is make that all electric. Instead of burning oil and gas to give us the energy and the electricity we need, we want to do 100% clean energy, all electric. We want to turn buildings into Teslas. Just like a Tesla or an electric vehicle is all electric with no fossil fuels, we want to do that with our buildings. And if we can do it in one building, we can do it in all buildings. And if we do it in all buildings, we'll reduce 30% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions.
Fed actually wants the dollar to be relatively firm because a stronger dollar restrains economic activity and it reduces inflation because it reduces the cost of imports into the United States. So the Fed is not unhappy with the dollar strength. This is just part and parcel, one aspect of how you tighten financial conditions.
That the constraints revealed by the pandemic are likely to be with us for some time, perpetuating imbalances, contributing to inflation, and likely requiring a sustained policy response. I'll also argue that constraints continue to bind policy.
I support continued increases in the FOMC's policy rate, and based on what I know as of today, I support a significant increase at our next meeting on September 20th and 21st to get the policy rate to a setting that is clearly restricting demand.
Just some recent comments on the Fed's fight to tame rising price pressures. And indeed, we're going to get readings on this from right across the board. For instance, this evening, somewhat 9 hours away, we've got India out with its latest CPI read, looking here at a figure of about 6.9%. Then it's the biggie at US data, 8% expected as a headline for US inflation. That would be down from 8.5%, but there's some whispers it could be lower than that. But we'll be looking at the core in particular too, excluding food and energy. Inflation in the UK, though, just approaching 10.5% is the estimate. And moving to Friday, and China's data dump, industrial production, retail sales, and fixed asset investment, all coming out then.
Lots to digest. Let's bring in George Baburs, Executive Director and Head of Research at K2 Asset Management. George, good to have you with us. I mean, lots of data, but key is US CPI. You say for most of developed markets anyways, inflation has peaked, the dollar has peaked.
Yes, so peak inflation, reasonable to say. It'll be stubbornly high. Unit costs at levels where the core won't get to that 2 to 3 range for a while, so it'll be stubbornly high, therefore cash rates stay stubbornly higher for longer. But having said that, the sentiment will be much more improved when you get the headline inflation number falling. It's a base effect, obviously, but they're good signs. There's going to be supply chain disruption for many years to come. There's many consequences, but the direction of inflation is in the right direction.
Surely there's more upside for the dollar, given where the European economy is right now. I mean, that energy crisis is just going to pummel the economy, and given where China is right now as well. And don't mention Japan.
Yeah, no, spot on. The US dollar is where it is because it's more predictive on interest rate settings. Its central bank is doing what it says. Earnings visibility, credit visibility, it's a better economic condition, energy security. There's so many things saying that there's more predictability all parts of the capital structure, therefore US dollar strength. Now, can it continue to the same degree? Possibly not, but it'll be holding these gains for some time as we go through the pain of what is Europe and the energy solution there and the divergence of the emerging market. So US dollar strength to be maintained, not increase at the same rate. But again, it's there for many obvious reasons. The predictability of US earnings, credit conditions, etc. Put it where it is. And it's very good, as all the Fed speakers are saying. It helps us a little bit contractionary on monetary policy, and obviously it addresses inflation at the margin.
George, having a look at that inflation reading coming out Tuesday, of course, in a bit more detail, this goes to our question of the day. And how will assets perform after we do get that data print? What's your take? I mean, there's talk about it being lower. What would happen in either case?
Lower risk assets are bid. Higher risk assets aren't. That's such an oversimplification. And we're talking about risk assets as obviously equity, deeply subordinate, holdings, and high yield for that matter.
So that brings us nicely also just to talk about where you, as you moment, allocating your assets. How has this evolved? Because I think you were far more into cash earlier this year. Has that changed?
Yeah, so the deployment of cash from that sell-off that was very unpleasant in the June quarter, and the cash positions where you can deploy cash, because most of the wholesale funds you can't, but where you can deploy cash, that's gone from around about 15 to 20% to around that 5-10% now, following that June correction. Again, it's that pro-risk, US dollar bias, US dollar earnings, searching for that S&P 500, looking for that 4,400 one-year forward for that equity bourse, FYI, just as a backdrop. So we are pro-risk, cautiously optimistic, growth at reasonable price, where to do it. If you're into high-yield credit, very compelling. remain short duration. Obviously, the allocation to high yield sub-investment grade is really an equity sleeve that you're really substituting and trading off. And senior unsecured, still short duration, but still picking up where we can that running yield that's marginally higher from a year ago. But again, there's reward for risk cautiously. And again, the reason why is we don't believe the Fed funds rate will stay sustainably above 4% for a long period of time. But you won't get the easy sub 2.5% anytime soon either for many years. A high risk-free rate is something we need to be very mindful of all valuations going forward. But that's the sort of backdrop. Cautiously pro-risk, we're deployed.
How compelling is the China story right now? Valuations are looking very, very cheap. But of course, I mean, economic growth is also on its way down, and there's a lack of meaningful stimulus expected.
Yeah, without a doubt, number two economy in the world has been the real outlier and disappointment. Initially, for investors like ourselves that always were investing in China, since March 21, we've really been very cautious from the regulatory oversight and changes. The property bubble is something that's so significant and large that the world's never seen. But post the Party Congress, we believe that there'll be some certainty for the years ahead. We believe there'll be coordination from Beijing and PBOC to address and ring-fence these bad and doubtful debts and impairments in the property sector and let domestic demand start going. And there's many issues, and it's disappointed on the downside, but there has to be something that they're going to turn it around in the years ahead. But it has been a concern. Valuations are very, very, very cheap. We're only in there on a couple of things like Alibaba and JD in the last quarter, but really we're so underweight where we normally would be for China and China earnings.
And you talk about Alibaba and the likes. I mean, that could be further pressure given where the Biden administration is headed, right? I mean, it continues to put pressure for U.S. companies to stop their investments in Chinese tech companies.
Without a doubt, and that is why our global portfolios are so overweight US dollar, that this is the highest weightings they've had for a whole cycle. But the disappointment, obviously, with China earnings, China growth this year has been worse than anyone forecasted. We've been underweight like everybody else since early 21. But the valuations are cheap for a reason. There are concerns. But again, you'd have to think the number two economy on the planet would, at the end of this Party Congress, have some certainty of who will be there in power for the next 5 years, work with the PBOC, work with Beijing, ring-fence property, bad and doubtful debts, and start getting domestic demand. And very quickly, our template for domestic demand activity is when Japan's opening up. Very different economies, but their opening up would be obviously consumer discretionary, etc., travel, and you would think that domestic demand in China in the years ahead has to improve from these very weak levels.
Zero COVID is key, George.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Lion City. Stay as long as you want. George Wilburys, K2 Asset Management, Rish.
All right. Quickly moving on, having a look at former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers saying the dollar surge isn't over yet, telling us why he expects further strength for the greenback.
We've mounted a stronger response macroeconomically to the pandemic. Our central bank is moving faster to do necessary tightening with respect to monetary policy, given inflation, and all those various factors are making us a safe haven, a mecca for capital, and that's causing resources to flow into the dollar. It's remarkable that people were saying that the dollar's day was past not very long ago, given its current strength. And my guess is that there's room for this to continue. You know, the euro was in the low 80s against the dollar 20-some years ago. And in some ways, the relative fundamentals of the United States compared to Europe are even stronger now than they were then.
And that was former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers speaking exclusively with Bloomberg's David Weston on Wall Street Week. Plenty more ahead. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg.
You will put a woman on Mars. You will bring forth global cooling. You will be the first chief crypto officer. Because when you subscribe to Bloomberg, you won't just get news. You'll get insight into limitless possibilities, knowledge, and inspiration to feed your ambition. So before you invent, pioneer, disrupt, before you change the world, Bloomberg.
VK ฟิล์มรถยนต์เกรดสูงกันน็อตสูงสุด 76%
consumers are very aspirational. You've got millions of people riding motorbikes, and they want to be riding inside cars. Vingroup, Vietnam's biggest conglomerate, has really tapped into that. The founder and chairman aspires to be the Elon Musk of Vietnam.
Vung is Vietnam's richest man with outsized ambitions. He wants to sell cars not only to the Vietnamese, but also Americans and other consumers around the world.
If VinFast is successful, that goes very well with the ambition of the Communist Party of Vietnam. But if they fail, it will be very, very hard blow to Vingroup and also to the national economy.
Welcome back. Let's do a quick check of the latest business flash headlines. Fernando Zobel de Ayala has resigned as president and CEO of Philippine conglomerate Ayala Corporation, effective immediately. Zobel has been on medical leave since August. He's also resigned from roles in the company's various units, including Ayala Land and BPI. Battery giant CATL says its largest plant in China is now operating a factory bubble. The factory is in the city of Yibin in Sichuan, which asked its population of 4.6 million to stay at home on Friday amid what officials described as a severe COVID situation. And activist investor Dan Loeb has backed away from calling for Walt Disney to spin off ESPN. In a series of tweets Sunday, Loeb said he looks forward to seeing ESPN generate considerable synergies as part of Disney. Separately, Disney CEO Bob Chapek says ESPN is critical to his overall vision of the company, which includes sports betting.
Okay, we're just getting some headlines at the moment, well, a little while ago, in fact, about the Biden administration perhaps broadening their curbs on U.S. chip exports. This is according to a Reuters report saying the Commerce Department plans to publish new regulations based on restrictions communicated in letters to companies such as KLA Corporation and Lam Research. The letters forbidding them from exporting chip-making equipment to Chinese factories that produce advanced semiconductors. There we go. Let's look at what's going on with semis in this part of the world. Let's have a look at what we have coming up on the show with the worst not over for energy markets as traders weigh their halt in Nord Stream gas flows and China's weakening demand. More on that next.
Get the power of app analytics and engagement in one single platform.
Watch Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition for the news you need when you need it.
I'm Matt Miller with Kaylee Lyons in New York and Anna Edwards in London.
I'm going to be watching retail earnings from both Home Depot and Walmart.
Then surveillance for in-depth analysis.
Alongside Tom Keane and Elisa Abrambitz, I'm Jonathan Ferro.
Across the board, these are good numbers.
The big headline there is reaffirming the outlook.
How much does this give faith that you can get some sort of resurgence in consumer spending?
Bloomberg Surveillance. Be informed. Be prepared. Be ahead of the game.
welcome back. And it is a quiet trading day in Asia, given that China, Hong Kong, and South Korea are on holiday, though markets getting a lift from that easing king dollar, at least for now, that is lifting benchmarks pretty much across the board here in Asia. Is a mixed picture for currencies, though the likes of the currencies in the Czech Republic as well as in Poland getting a lift from that news out of Ukraine, regaining that key territory. Flip the page, take a look in terms of those Japan reopening stocks on the back of news that perhaps Japan will allow more foreign visitors to travel freely. That's lifting pretty much travel-related stocks, the likes of Japan Airlines currently up by almost 2%, ANA up 2.5%. Rish.
Yeah, also oil prices being depressed, helping things there as well. Now, let's turn to what we asked our guests last week on Bloomberg, and it was actually what the most significant shortage will be in the next 12 months.
There haven't been any real shortages in oil.
We could see, countries like Germany, in fact, completely run out of gas in early 2023.
It's just, again, market nervousness around shortages that could come in the future, and very real nervousness around that.
For me, where's the scarcity? It's going to come from a scarcity of liabilities or reserves, and I think that's going to blow out funding costs. I think that's probably one of the biggest risks.
Certainly energy security has elevated its position, and certainly we're going through a transition. We have to do it more sustainably.
The best case for consumers at the moment is really sad to say, is pulling back on consumption, conserving. They're doing it because high prices tend to do that.
Well, absolutely. One of the questions we were asking here was about which commodity will drive inflation the most. I mean, as you can see that, it's natural gas. But, I mean, it's bizarre that corn came in with an 8% reading there.
But not surprising that natural gas is the one that everybody was concerned about, especially on the back of what's happening in Europe, which also we heard from the Belgian minister saying, you know what, it's not going to be just one difficult winter. It could be 10 difficult winters. So that's definitely one to watch. Now, speaking of oil prices under pressure and concerns about weakening global demand, and as investors assess details of a U.S.-led plan to cap the price of Russian crude, energy and commodities editor Andrew James joins us for now. What are the developments there, Andrew?
Hi, Haslinda. Well, on oil, we're just being hit by sort of concerns about a global slowdown. We've got a new virus outbreak at a prominent university in Beijing, and that comes, as Chengdu is still locked down and other curbs in other parts of the country. And, of course, we've got, the threat of recessions in the US and particularly Europe with, the energy crisis there worsening things. We have the US talking about this plan to cap the price of Russian oil exports that will be going ahead. Whether the level of adoption that gets, of course, remains to be seen, and how Vladimir Putin reacts to that as well. The US has been saying they don't think Putin has a choice and he'll have to comply. But, that's far from clear at this point, I think.
Andrew, what we saw in the invasion of Crimea, I think 2016, was them talking about an energy union. But EU ministers, that came to nothing. EU ministers now kind of perhaps also trying to get onto the same mantra and calling for urgent measures in order to tame these prices for gas.
That's right, Rish. We had the meeting on Friday with the EU ministers, and what they essentially did was ask the European Commission to come out with some concrete proposals this week. They talked about capping the price of Russian gas imports. That's assuming there are more Russian gas imports, of course. What they didn't do was actually talk about mandatory cuts in demand. Perhaps that's because it's a bit too politically difficult at this point. Anyway, so we're going to see, I think, a lot of robust back and forth this week as the European Commission tries to come up with some concrete proposals, remembering, of course, that there are 27 countries in the European Union, and they're all going to have to agree on these proposals.
Andrew, thank you. Energy and commodities editor Andrew James. Now let's get the first word news with Vonnie Quinn in New York. Vonnie.
Linda, thank you. Ukraine's forces have reportedly continued their rapid advance in the Kharkiv region, exploiting an extraordinary collapse of Russian defences. Unconfirmed reports suggest Kyiv's troops have taken a key town not far from the Russia-Ukraine border. Russia's defence ministry, meanwhile, published a map showing much of the country's forces out of the Kharkiv region without commenting further. Japan is planning to allow foreign visitors to book trips directly and travel freely within the country, this according to broadcaster FNN. Officials are also said to be planning to scrap daily arrival caps and reinstate visa waivers for tourists. FNN says Prime Minister Fumio Kishida may decide on a move as soon as this week. The rules should apply to travellers who are fully vaccinated or provide negative test results. A new opinion poll suggests the majority of Thais are dissatisfied with Deputy Prime Minister Prawit Wongsuwan acting as Premier. The survey comes ahead of a general election expected early next year in which Prawit has emerged as a contender. Prawit became acting Prime Minister in late August after Prayut Chan-o-cha was suspended over a term limit debate. China plans to launch 3 unmanned missions to the moon over the next 10 years. The announcement comes a day after Beijing said it had discovered a new lunar mineral that contains helium-3, an isotope that may be a future energy source. Both China and the United States are eyeing the moon's resources, with space mining shaping up to be a possible source of tension. Global news, 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Vonnie Quinn, and this is Bloomberg. Rish.
Thanks, Vonnie. Right, we've got, of course, this rapid cool down taking place in real estate. It is threatening to worsen a global economic downturn. It's also emerging as a key variable for central bankers who want to really bring inflation down. Chief Asia Economics Correspondent Enda Curran. And some of these, I mean, you look at, for instance, applications for mortgages in the US, you can see them really falling back. You can see that in other parts of the world. Australia at the moment seeing some really quite sharp downturns for housing too.
Yeah, it's a synchronised global downturn, Rish. And the backstory was house prices soared during the pandemic around the world because interest rates were so low and money was so cheap. Well, now the opposite's happening. Interest rates are going up, and we're seeing a hit in places like New Zealand and Australia. Canada's getting pronounced hit. UK prices coming off the ball. Even in the US, which is insulated because most mortgages there are on a so-called fixed rate. Goldman Sachs are looking at a zero price growth for US houses next year. So collectively, we are seeing a slowdown. It's not, of course, on the scale that we saw during the global financial crisis. There are reasons why it won't be that bad. People have more savings, banks are in better condition, but at the same time, house prices are a central part of economic activity and they're coming off the ball.
Well, this is similar to 2008, of course, isn't it, which saw a big fall in property prices because, let's face it, you can't predicate an entire economy on ever rising house prices, and this can be one of the biggest, I guess, things could lead to recession.
Yeah, and central banks do want house prices to cool in the same way they want growth to cool, in the same way they want consumer spending to cool. It's all part of the plan. The thing is, though, it's the pace and extent of that decline which is what's critical for policymakers. And even though they, of course, do talk up confidence, they're watching very carefully what's happening because houses and house prices are such an important part of net worth. They're such an important part of the economic multiplier effect in economies, from construction through to finalisation and everything else. So yes, they're talking up a good story at the moment that the economies can handle these rising rates, but they don't want to have a house price crash on their hands either.
How exposed are borrowers to higher rates? And put that in perspective for us, because the likes of those in the US, for instance, lock in their rates for as long as 30 years.
Yep, so the most vulnerable are those who are on variable rate mortgages, Haslenda, those who took out loans when rates were so low, and of course they're now going to face a fairly painful reset, or those on shorter term fixed rate mortgages, which now of course also need to reset as they mature. They're going to face higher costs. Now, like you mentioned, the US is fairly well insulated given its predominance of fixed rate loans there. The story really does vary by economy right around the world. There's no uniform picture on this when it comes to variable rate loans, but Australia, New Zealand, UK, Spain, they're among those who have some vulnerability to this, and this is a sector of the economy I think policymakers are watching very closely to see how they do cope with rising interest rates. As I mentioned, Harish, there are reasons why households are in better shape, banks are in better shape, but everybody's keeping a close eye on this because the house price decline hasn't yet played out, and several economists are saying it's got a way to go into next year and maybe the year after that.
You talk about vulnerabilities, that wave of defaults. Is that coming? Is that not coming? What's the sense we're getting out there?
Well, there's an element of wait and see in all of this because, again, the starting point is, look, since the financial crisis, lessons have been learned, and that's true of both households, it's true of banks, and it's true of economic policy making, because one of the big tools over the last decade or so has been so-called macroprudential tools, which some say have stoked house price growth, of course, but others say have made sure that banks are well positioned and stress testing of mortgages have been done. Nonetheless, Linda, at the pace of rate hikes that we're seeing this year, the synchronized upswing in mortgage rates around the world, it would be a big call to say there won't be any impact on mortgage holders from what we're seeing, and then in particular those at the bottom end of that ladder, given the hit they're already facing to their real income from inflation prices. There is, of course, a threat to household wealth, and one of the obvious areas will be potential repayments or, if not outright defaults, on mortgages.
And thank you, Bloomberg's Chief Asia Economics Correspondent, Enda Curran. Now, still to come, state-owned electricity trader PTC India tells us how its bottom line is being affected by the surge in commodity prices. We speak to Chairman and Managing Director Rajib Kumar Mishra next. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Policy, politics, from the White House to the Hill, Bloomberg covers the leaders in legislation.
That was really a tectonic shift for this White House.
The theory of this bill, as I understand it, is there'll be a multiplier effect.
How did Democrats mobilize specifically younger voters?
Bringing you the political news you need to know.
The president has made it very clear that this is a significant focus.
For the intersection of Wall Street and Washington, nobody covers politics like Bloomberg. Welcome to the world of decentralized finance. Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people, the transactions, and the technology. Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays.
That is, by the moment, there we go. Just about 3 minutes to go before we start off the trading day there, the trading week. We've got tech stocks actually in the pre-market, just helping to lead things for the Sensex, which is up about 0.2%. We also got the country, of course, set to release its monthly CPI numbers, consumer price inflation for August, publishing data also on industrial production for July. We're looking at industrial production to be 4.2% higher and CPI to come in at 6.9%, according to the economists we've talked to. India also opting out of trade talks with the US-led Indo-Pacific Economy Framework. That means it'll be avoiding easing access to its markets via a multi-country deal. There we go. Nifty futures also indicating gains for the start of the session.
As you said, Rish, India's inflation likely moved higher in August, marking an 8th straight month above the RBI's target range. Let's bring in Bloomberg South Asia economy editor Ruchi Bhatia. Ruchi, retail inflation due today could continue to remain sticky. What's the reason for that?
Well, absolutely right. Retail prices and retail inflation that is expected today is likely to come in at 6.9%, and this is going to, move away from the downtrend that we've seen for the last 3 months. This is mostly going to be on account of sticky food prices. We have seen erratic rains as well as weather conditions in India that is leading to high food prices, and that is going to reflect in the numbers this time around as well. And even though we are seeing wholesale prices easing. In fact, data that is expected on Wednesday is likely to show that food prices will ease, in fact, in line with the kind of trends that we have seen in the last 3 months. This is unlikely to really result into lower retail inflation because most companies are going to use the downtrend in wholesale prices to recoup their margins, and this is certainly going to come in as a big worry for India's central bank as well.
Well, let's talk about the RBI. I mean, would it mean that they're in trouble for already having missed their mandate to keep prices within 2 to 6%? That's the band they have. I mean, you can't really fault them given the I suppose, unforeseen risks out there.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, India's central bank has already said, Rashad, that they will not be meeting their price mandate target for 3 quarters. That means that by the end of next month, they would have officially, for the first time ever, failed in meeting their 2 to 6% mandate. Having said that, the Reserve Bank of India does expect that prices will come within their target range by the first quarter of next year. But having said that, the central bank has maintained that inflation is their priority, and even though we did see weaker than expected growth and that was stoking some talks by various economists that the RBI perhaps may go slow in terms of future rate hikes, one really has to see how the central bank will do the balancing act when they meet next on the 30th of September.
Bloomberg South Asia economy editor Ruchi Bhatia. Now, as Western Europe turns away from Russian energy, India and China have emerged as new markets for Moscow to exploit.
Well, our next guest runs state-owned electricity trader PTC India. Let's get his insights on the global energy crisis and its impact on India itself. Rajiv Kumar Mishra is PTC India chairman and MD. Rajiv, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, give us a sense of how sanctions on Russia by the West and India continuing to purchase Russian oil, I should say, has affected your business and indeed India itself.
Richard, let me tell you what has happened is India, if I talk about energy, we have imported oil and other source of energy. That's imported coal from different part of the world. But that is very small number. If I talk about electricity, that ranges from around 4% to 6%. So bulk of it was a domestic coal which we have generated, and most of the energy source for electricity generation is based on the domestic coal. So for that, the impact is bare minimum. Of course, with the global energy prices going up and some of the Russian oil coming to India, of course, that is part of things which has happened. But if you ask me, the least affected economy in the world, maybe this part of the world, India, and I can speak about the country and my company, we have the least impact of the energy crisis which is going on in Europe.
So Rajiv, does this then produce an opportunity for you?
We have to see the prices in the Indian market in the real perspective, because what I can say with confidence is Indian market for most of the time is tied up. If I talk about electricity first and then I'll move on to the other sources of energy, is tied up on a long-term PPA to the extent of around 90%, and around 10% to 11% is the short-term market, which depends upon imported coal or other source of energy. And this fluctuation, that is the imported coal price fluctuation, or for that matter, e-auction coal prices in India, impacts that part of the market. So to a great extent, if you ask me, the Indian energy market is ring-fenced to a great extent, and the consumers are getting the least impact because of that. Of course, I'm not saying that we are not connected. We are connected with the international prices, but the impact on the end consumers are bare minimum.
Rajiv, we know that the U.S. is pushing India to agree to the price caps on Russian oil. India pushing for a consensus. It says that's what's needed. I mean, how do you see this playing out? What impact will this have?
Of course, this is something which is a geopolitical thing. A lot of issues being taken up at the the government level to see that, ensure that the interest of the country is paramount. And whenever there is a dialogue at the, say, at the apex level of the government, they will take care of the domestic interest, of course. Being a global citizen, we have to take care of the interest of the entire world.
This issue brings to light the issue of energy security for all countries. I mean, where's India on this, and what role do you see PTC India playing?
Let me tell you, for all the cross-border electricity, PTC India is the central, and almost 70% of the cross-border trade. PTC India is the agency which we are or the intermediary which is taking care of this. And we are taking a lot of interest in recent times so that the energy trade between the neighboring countries increases. And we also have to, as an aggregator of power in the country, in many of the cases, we ensure that the customers should be least impacted. There has to be minimum aberrations in the market, and that we do take care with all the predictions, the forecasting, and understanding the market in advance.
Rajiv, you had some governance issues at PTC India Financial. There's caused some independent directors to resign here. What was this all about? And give us a sense of what you're doing to improve governance in that division and the entire group as well.
Let me tell you, I mean, that's one issue which started in the month of January. We have taken enough precautions in the last 7-8 months, and we would ensure 100% of the compliances on part of the company. And if at all there is any governance issue, first of all, let me tell you that all the recent findings have said that there was hardly any governance issue. It was operational issues which we need to improve upon in the financing company, but nothing to do with the holding company where we are doing the core business, and the bulk of the business comes from our core business.
Rajiv, we know that PTC wants to do business overseas. What's the plan there?
Yes, we find a lot of interest in our neighboring countries. As you mentioned, we have plans to see how the market is emerging in our neighboring countries, particularly in Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, which is rightly connected to the Indian grid. And we would like to make it a happening market, particularly in terms of the hydro potential they have. Because with the more of renewable coming in the grid, we would like to add more hydro in the system so that the balancing can be done. And we see this as something very interesting, that the hydro potentials are being harnessed in the countries like Bhutan and Nepal. And they have very good plans of around 3,000 to 5,000 megawatt of additional capacity, which they would like to bring in another 3 to 5 years. So interesting development with our neighbors, and we would like to get the benefit of the integrated market out of it. Of course, Sri Lanka is right now not connected, but we would like to see that also becomes a part of the grid, so that the trade can start in terms of electricity with Sri Lanka as well.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. PTC India's Rajiv Kumar Mishra there. Quick check on Indian markets. Started off their trading day just about 7 minutes ago. Here we go. We are moving higher. We've got Tech Mahindra, the biggest percentage gainer on the Nifty thus far. A lot more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite, positioning companies to meet the next generation of challenges, breaking out of traditional roles to become Chief Future Officer. Katie Fogarty crossed over from a Wall Street analyst role to steer Shake Shack through a critical transformation.
Before, it was a lot of kind of sitting in an armchair type basis. Here, it is driving a plan of how we can best maximize shareholder returns.
Chief Future Officer, Wednesday on Bloomberg. Brought to you by Workday.
You're back with Bloomberg Markets as we just quickly check in on some of the latest business flash headlines. Adani Group reportedly planning to shake up the boards of directors at 2 Indian cement makers. This does follow the company's $10.5 billion takeover of those entities. Mint reporting that Gautam Adani, along with his son and nephew, will join the boards of ACC and Ambuja. Long-standing board members will step down after those acquisitions are indeed completed. Having a look at the French power distributor Strasbourg Electricity, it oversold large quantities of electricity due to trading errors earlier last week, a mistake that could cost the company over $60 million. The firm saying that it made quantity errors on transactions on Tuesday and Wednesday. Looking at Tesla briefly, rolling out its new beta version of its autopilot system, which it calls Full Self-Driving, or FSD. CEO Elon Musk tweeting that the version is overly cautious, especially around pedestrians. Last month, Musk did announce that Tesla will indeed start charging some $15,000 for the driver assistance system.
Well, markets not doing very much as investors await that key CPI data out of the U.S. 8% is what markets are expecting. Of course, on the back of that, we have the U.S. dollar easing somewhat, giving some relief to Asian equities, also some relief to some Asian currencies, the likes of the Czech koruna getting a reprieve from developments in Ukraine. That is it from Bloomberg Markets Asia. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalysts. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalysts.
So now you've been at JP Morgan for about 25 years?
Yes.
Okay, so, and now you run one of the most important parts of JP Morgan, which, as I say, is the asset and wealth management business. What actually is wealth management, and how is that different than asset management?
Great question. The two are often used interchangeably, but they have distinctions. Asset management business is where we manage money on behalf of individuals, institutions, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds. We manage them in mutual funds, we manage them in ETFs, we manage them in single stocks, single bonds, hedge funds, private equity, and the like. And that is the heart of the fiduciary business that we run here at JP Morgan. Wealth management is that plus understanding someone's entire balance sheet. So for the individuals where we manage money, we also help them with their mortgage. We help them with a loan that they might need. We help them with their basic credit card. And so wealth management is trying to help someone with their entire life, both their assets and their liabilities, their planning, their gifting, the legacy that they want to leave for their families, the 529 plans they need to prepare to get their kids to go through college. And it's a great insight into people's, entire journey.
I've always been a person who's just been attracted to hair. I like to sit and think and theorize how I can manifest these visions that I have for braiding and how I can take something that may seem like it's a line drawing in my mind and apply that to someone's scalp.
We are the only culture that has hair that grows out of our head the way that it does. Anyone from the African diaspora is born with this amazingly curly hair that can be shaped into a variety of different ways of expression.
I want Black people to love themselves for how they naturally appear and also to appreciate the cultural practices such as braiding that our ancestors have practiced for centuries.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East. Our top stories this morning. Ukrainian forces continue their rapid advance in Kharkiv region, exploiting extraordinary collapse of the Russian defenses and raising the question of how far they can go. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says Europe is prepared to weather the fallout should Russia decide to halt gas deliveries altogether. The latest reading of the U.S. inflation is due tomorrow. It likely slowed for a second month in August, but probably won't be enough to stop the Fed from delivering another jumbo hike later this month. And Israel's cabinet approves a plan to attract foreign workers for technology companies and to boost the number of Arabs and ultra-Orthodox Jews working in the sector. We have the details. It's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. Warm welcome to the show. I'm Manish Krenny in Dubai. The question markets need to ask themselves is the depth of the dollar correction or the alpha in the euro. Look at the performance over the past 2 days. You begin to understand the confluence of both that political narrative where Ukraine makes headway against Russia and, of course, the ECB hawkishness is delivered. Mr. Nagel at the ECB talks about clear steps must follow. That's what's needed if inflation lingers. This is the Bundesbank president, Mr. Nagel. He is talking a hawkish narrative. Of course, if inflation becomes de-anchored, they're already expecting 6% inflation in Europe in 2023. This is a repricing of the dollar as much as it is a hawkishness from the ECB. NAB call an imminent war end to the war seems like a long shot, but good news for now on the advances of Ukrainian troops against Europe. Of course, the depth of this correction, this is the dollar board for you. You've got Waller, Mester, Powell, Bullard, all with this clarion call of the need for more significant moves. That's Waller's narrative. So the door is open to another 75 basis point hike. But the dollar for the moment just steps back. You are just seeing a repricing this morning. Sterling up by an eighth of 1% at 116.08. We're waiting for more verbal intervention if it will come on dollar yen. By the way, asset managers and leverage funds boosting their net short positions on yen. So this market is very short into verbal intervention. Let's have a look at the oil market because you're looking at, again, the pervasive narrative in the oil market is about demand weakness and the intensifying lockdowns in China. This is oil over the past 6 days. By the way, hedge funds are cutting their net bullish positions on Brent, and WTI, the oil bets there, are falling to a 3-week low. We have the sketchy details of a price cap from the USA, but it's going to be up to the oil industry to police that. So what will that price cap be, and how effective will that be from G7? Let's check in on the rest of the markets around the world. Julia Sally has that from our Sydney studio. Almost caught me on the hop there, Jules. You hopped across the pond.
I did indeed, on a mask-free plane. What a changing world, Manus. And speaking of the reopening theme, we are hearing two separate reports from FNN and Nikkei News that we could see an easing of those very strict travel curbs in Japan. That is giving a boost to those reopening plays. But it is a more broadly positive session here in Asia too, up for a third session in a row. So that is the longest winning streak we've had in about a month. But worth noting, some of the key markets closed today, including Hong Kong, China, South Korea, for the Mid-Autumn Festival. We're also watching, of course, the big move coming through in semiconductor stocks, similar to what you saw on Wall Street. That's boosting the likes of the Taiwan market. And when it comes to the offshore yuan, of course, no trading the onshore today, but we are seeing just a little bit of weakness there as we continue to monitor what steps the PBOC will take. Let's have a further look at the yen. You mentioned there, of course, the movement we have been seeing in the Japanese yen, and we did have some comments coming through as well from the Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary saying that they must take necessary measures while paying close attention to the yen slide. But you are seeing record bearish yen bets. But of course, any policy tweak from the BOJ coupled with an easing of the border situation could see the yen ratchet higher. Manus.
Jules, enjoy the time down under. Juliet Sally in Sydney. To our top story, Ukrainian forces are continuing a rapid advance in the Kharkiv region, exploiting extraordinary collapse of the Russian defences and raising the question of just how far can they go. Let's bring in our Bloomberg opinion columnist. It is Clara Ferrara Marquez. This is a pretty important moment in terms of how you read this. This is an advance by the Ukrainian forces, specifically in those very poignant eastern border areas, near to the border of Russia. Your take?
Absolutely. This is a little early to say whether it's a definitive turning point, but it certainly is absolutely remarkable. The Ukrainian forces have taken about 3,000 square kilometres of land that took Russian forces many months to conquer. The scale of the collapse as well and of the retreat has been remarkable. The way Ukrainian forces have used Western weapons to strike at supply lines and at retake key cities like Izum, which then supplies the Donbass region. Really, really very important indeed. And we're not seeing an awful lot of official reaction from Moscow, but a lot of discontent already visible on pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin military telegram channels, for example, and even on Russian TV.
Okay, let's see just how much more advance the Ukrainian troops can make. Our Bloomberg opinion columnist, Clara Ferrara Marquez. Germany is prepared and Europe is prepared to weather the fallout should Russia decide to halt gas deliveries altogether. That's according to the Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The EU ministers met on Friday and they asked the Commission to come up with emergency liquidity measures to help the strained energy markets. Let's get more with our energy and commodities editor, Andrew Janes. So we know the margin calls are ramping higher. We've got the American narrative on a price cap. What did the Europeans coalesce around, if anything at all, of substance?
Hi, Manus. Well, essentially, they asked the European Commission to come up with some more concrete proposals this week, but they did talk about a few things. Price caps on Russian gas imports, that's assuming there are more Russian gas imports, and also more wider caps on all gas imports, although they kind of agreed that they would need more discussions on that. What they didn't do was talk about mandatory demand curbs. That may be a reflection of the fact that that's politically difficult. Interesting to note, you mentioned Olaf Scholz's assessment that Germany and Europe can handle a complete cut-off of Russian gas. Both a German think tank and the German Association of Municipalities and Towns came out pretty shortly after that to say they disagreed with that assessment, and there was still the threat of blackouts there.
Yep, it's certainly not a definitive response, is it? But then, of course, their dependence on Russian gas has dropped quite aggressively. Andrew, thank you very much. Let's see what is delivered through the week. Andrew James, our energy and commodities editor, for the very latest from Singapore. But the European Central Bank has required to continue to raise interest rates if the current trend of consumer prices continues. That's according to the Bundesbank president, Joachim Nagel. Let's get more with our chief correspondent for economics in Asia. It is Enda Karen. Enda, good to have you with me. So this is the president of the Bundesbank. We would expect a hawkish narrative, but it really was quite definitive. Your take?
Yeah, you would expect a hawkish message, Manus, but of course he certainly doubled down on that. He made the point that last week was necessary, and if inflation continues to go the way that it is, then the ECB will have to keep going with these jumbo-sized hikes. This was in a radio interview, by the way, in Germany. He also made the point that it's more important for economic prosperity to get inflation under control now, to anchor those inflation expectations, rather than to let it, of course, soar off uncontrolled. Now, his comments do gel with the signalling coming from the ECB itself. Our colleagues reported on Friday out of Frankfurt that the ECB are well prepared to go by 75 if they need to. Madame Lagarde, of course, herself has made points that the ECB will continue to keep going given where inflation is where it's at. But the big debate, of course, Manus, is why is the ECB going at the pace that it is, and what can they do to control inflation given the nature of inflation in Europe, which is, of course, this unique energy crisis. So obviously a hawkish message from the Bundesbank president, but lots of debate about where the ECB should be going from here.
So we've got two very important data points this week. CPI, which is expected to drop on the back of the drop in the gas prices, but that's probably not enough to really shift the Fed narrative on the 75 basis points. And then, of course, it's Michigan sentiment, which is the softer aspect of the data that we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, we could get a big headline out of the US tomorrow, Manus, which is if we do get a slowdown in headline inflation, it will reinforce views that US inflation has peaked and is maybe starting to slide back a bit. But this is where you have to go under the bonnet a bit, because core inflation is expected to be quite sticky. Inflation pressures are broad-based in the US, very different to what we just spoke about in Europe, for example. In particular, people are looking at rental costs or shelter costs in the US. So we might get a sort of a strong headline that inflation is coming off the boil, but core prices will remind everybody why the Fed is on the path that it is, and that seems to be heading towards another jumbo-sized 75 basis points hike next week. So I think regardless of what number comes out of it tomorrow, it's still a lot of focus on a hawkish Fed and most likely a jumbo hike when they meet.
Absolutely, mind you, we just have this mini reprieve. One's got to question the depth of this dollar dip this morning. Enda, thank you very much. Enda Karen there in Hong Kong. Let's check back in on the first word headlines from around the world. Juliet Sally's with me in Sydney.
Manus, Japan planning to allow foreign visitors to book trips directly and travel freely within the country, this according to the broadcaster FNN. Officials also said to be planning to scrap daily arrival caps and reinstate visa waivers for tourists. FNN says Prime Minister Fumio Kishida may decide on a move as soon as this week. The rules should apply to travellers who are fully vaccinated or provide negative COVID test results. Meanwhile, officials in Beijing say a COVID outbreak at a top media school should be stamped out as soon as possible. The Communication University of China was put under lockdown on Friday, and 6 cases have been confirmed there. In the Xinjiang region, authorities have apologised for shortages of food and medicine in areas subject to COVID lockdowns. Officials are strictly enforcing the COVID zero policy ahead of next month's Party Congress. Sources say Brazil's presidential frontrunner Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is likely to appoint his centrist running mate to a key cabinet position if elected. We're told Geraldo Alckmin could lead several important ministries, including finance or agriculture. Da Silva's alliance with Alckmin is seen as the biggest sign yet he's committed to a moderate political and economic agenda. Well, Sweden's right-wing opposition has narrowly overtaken Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson's camp in an early vote count. The bloc that includes the Sweden Democrats is likely to gain 175 mandates in the 349-seat parliament in Sunday's elections versus 174 for the alliance led by the ruling Social Democrats. The result cements the ascent of a party previously shunned as extremists by the political establishment. And China plans to launch 3 unmanned missions missions to the moon over the next 10 years. The announcement came a day after Beijing said it had discovered a new lunar mineral that contains helium-3, an isotope that may be a future energy source. Both China and the US are eyeing the moon's resources, with space mining shaping as a possible source of tension. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Tech, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg. Manis.
Jules, thank you very much. Still ahead, we're going to talk through the region's economic health with Emirates MBD Ed Bell. He joins me shortly, and why he sees resilient growth across the Gulf. But up next, the risk rally continues as the dollar weakens. We'll get the insight from Julius Burr's Mark Matthews in Dubai. This is Bloomberg.
Apollo is helping to drive a more sustainable future. Across our platform, we have deployed more than $19 billion in climate capital. And in the next 5 years, we aim to deploy over $50 billion more.
As the new season dawns, economic sentiment and outlook remain very fragile. Stock markets remain down, central banks are raising interest rates as 40-year high inflation persists. Hawks at the Fed are looking for another 375 basis points in interest rate hikes before the year end. They argue that recession is already here, the yield curve is inverted, and the slowdown is going to last longer than expected without this significant action. Higher for longer appears to be the new Fed mantra.
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's a community of global leaders and innovators who are blazing new trails to transform business and government. This platform will help them share their ideas with the world and provide access to the resources they need to bring them to life. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
The ground, do you copy? Copy.
If we want to have successful human missions to Mars, we are going to have to learn to live and work off-world in a different way. The place where we are going to learn to do that is on the moon.
Can ESA help humanity take its next giant leap?
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
Everything you need to get set for the start of U.S. trading. Bloomberg The Open with Jonathan Farrell. Drilling down on the numbers and preparing you as only Bloomberg can. Weekdays on Bloomberg.
The Fed actually wants the dollar to be relatively firm because a stronger dollar restrains economic activity and it reduces inflation because it reduces the cost of imports into the United States. So the Fed is not unhappy with the dollar strength. This is just part and parcel, one aspect of how you tighten financial conditions.
That the constraints revealed by the pandemic are likely to be with us for some time, perpetuating imbalances, contributing to inflation, and likely requiring a sustained policy response. I'll also argue that constraints continue to bind policy.
I support continued increases in the FOMC's policy rate, and based on what I know as of today, I support a significant increase at our next meeting on September 20th and 21st to get the policy rate to a setting that is clearly restricting demand.
Fed officials there past and present on the fight to tame rising price pressures. US CPI due tomorrow, and the expectations are for a second straight drop month on month in the headline number. Meanwhile, a rebound in the euro and in the yen is sending the dollar weaker, stoking a rush towards risk assets. Markets also watching the potential impact for the Ukraine's military and the counter-offensive there. There is the Bloomberg Dollar Index rolling over ever so slightly. The depth of that reprieve. Let's take the depth of the drop to Mark Matthews, Managing Director, Head of Asia Research at Julius Baer. We're making a great deal out of what's driving risk, whether it's the rollover in the dollar or whether it's the risk that's the risk-on sentiment that's driving the dollar. I think let's start with Waller's comments. He favours another significant hike, so the market's ready for 75 basis points. Is that why you're seeing a small roll-off in the dollar this morning? Have we travelled and perhaps arrived on the dollar top?
We might have, Manus. I mean, unless you go back to the 1980s where there was a really big dollar rally under Ronald Reagan. Since then, you typically haven't seen the dollar rise this much, this quickly, without petering out. And we are finally getting a response out of some of the other major central banks. The ECB is the one that gets the most attention, of course, because it raised rates so much. But the Bank of Japan and the Ministry of Finance in Japan starting to express some discomfort over the collapse in the yen. The People's Bank of China fixing the dollar renminbi weaker over the last few days, certainly weaker than it should be. And then, smaller central banks like the Bank of Canada, the Reserve Bank of Australia, raising interest rates. So we may have reached some kind of inflection point with the dollar. And if we have, I think it's extremely significant because the dollar has been the major headwind facing markets this year.
I mean, the question is this. We are so primed now to arrive at 4%. Is the building consensus perhaps of where the top of rates are? If the dollar is reflecting that, stocks have weathered the repricing in rates really quite well, I would say, around the world and certainly in Europe. Do you think the stock market is already primed and ready for, let's say, a hike and hold at 4%? Do you think the equity market has already discounted a 4% terminal rate in the United States of America?
I do think so, yes. And I think that it also feels that we can live with that. And what interests me most, actually, in markets is how some of the emerging markets have outperformed the S&P so far this year, despite the fact we've been in a rising rate and strong dollar environment, which is typically the worst thing for emerging markets. But Brazil up 15% in dollar terms so far this year. India, I think, is down probably about 5% in dollars. Singapore is up a little bit. Indonesia, not bad, certainly better than the S&P. So I actually think there's an interesting thing going on within the markets. There's been some change in the markets where the leadership is slowly transiting over to these smaller markets that people aren't paying much attention to. But I feel they've got some good wind in their sails, all things considered.
If you were deploying a little bit more cash as you go into this last quarter of the year, where would you deploy that to? China still seems to be in zero COVID lockdown, and there doesn't seem to be an immediate end in sight in that. So are you tempted more to a little bit more of EM in the Asia space relative perhaps to the US exposure, given that narrative that you think maybe the pressure eases back a little bit on EM here?
Yes, I do, especially if it looks like the dollar is peaking and we get, maybe 75 basis points this month. I don't think the market would be shocked at all. As you rightly pointed out, it anticipates that. China, I feel very forlorn about China, Manus. It's a sad thing, but I think it's not a cyclical story. It's a structural story, a story of structural impairment. So that's very sad for the Chinese market, but ironically, it's good for the other markets in the emerging market space because it's such a very large market and it's commanded attention for so long. And I think that China being in this structural downturn actually makes those other ones more appealing, and they're very small relative to China. India's less than a third size of the Chinese stock market. So India, Vietnam.
Do you think we've already seen some of the major flows out of China? Various people have come on the show and said they could live without China in their basket. It's not going to materially change their return. With that in mind, do you think the flow, a lot of people talked about the flow of equity capital in here to the Gulf out of Russia. Do you think within emerging markets, the flow of capital has already happened from China, equity, bond and FX, into Pan-Asia, or is that momentum yet to develop?
I think it's yet to develop. In fact, if you look at the fund flows into India, for example, they were negative all last year and throughout this year. It's the locals who've been buying that market. I think there's a lot more to come for emerging markets ex-China.
Now, the big narrative, Mark, is, of course, we've had, I suppose, many interventions, verbal interventions in the yen market so far from Kuroda, from the deputy, make sure I get it right, the deputy chief of cabinet Kahara. Now, if we go back to the 1990s, it took concerted, coordinated and huge intervention before yen moved, and yet the positioning in this market is maximum short by the asset managers. That's what we're showing in the GTV library at the moment. Are you bothered by a few verbalist interventions? Do you need to see something of much more substance to move the yen?
I think ultimately we might need a change at the top, and I don't think Kuroda's scheduled to leave until 2023. So to answer your question, I have a feeling that we'll have to wait until then to get a really sizable change in the policy. But with the currency down so much, I mean, I think it's down a good 30% from where it was last year. And they're opening up, as you well know. I think that at least it could be putting in a bottom around here.
Okay, let's see whether they smell out a test of 147 mark before they really convulse. Mark Matthews, Managing Director, Head of Asia Research for Julius Baer. My guest this morning on the markets. Plenty more ahead on this Monday morning on Daybreak Middle East. This is Bloomberg.
You will put a woman on Mars. You will bring forth global cooling. You will be the first chief crypto officer. Because when you subscribe to Bloomberg, you won't just get news. You'll get insight into limitless possibilities, knowledge, and inspiration to feed your ambition. So before you invent, pioneer, disrupt, before you change the world, Bloomberg.
And now the Golden State Warriors, 6 NBA Finals in 8 years, 4 NBA championships. Congratulations, you are the 2022 NBA champions.
สวัสดีค่ะวันนี้ทุกคนอยู่กับแอดมินตูนนะคะหลังจากที่ได้ฟังเวอร์ชันภาษาอังกฤษของมิสเตอร์จีไปแล้วค่ะวันนี้นะคะเราก็มาฟังเวอร์ชันภาษาไทยกันบ้างตามคำเรียกร้องของเพื่อนๆเลยค่ะก่อนที่จะเข้าสู่คอนเทนต์อย่าลืมกดไลค์เป็นกำลังใจให้ด้วยนะคะและถ้าว่าใครยังไม่ได้กด subscribe ค่ะช่วยกดด้วยนะคะจะได้มุ่งหน้าสู่แสนซับไปด้วยกันค่ะเรามาเริ่มกันเลยค่ะในช่วงไม่กี่ปีที่ผ่านมานี้นะคะทีมใหญ่ๆเนี่ยลงทุนทุ่มเงินเพื่อเซ็นสัญญากับเหล่าซุปเปอร์สตาร์มากฝีมือมาร่วมทีมสัก 2-3 คนค่ะเพื่อตามล่าแชมป์แต่ว่าสำหรับทีม Golden State Warriors เจ้าของแชมป์ NBA ปีล่าสุดผู้เล่น5คนแรกของเขาเนี่ยนะคะมี4จาก5คนเลยค่ะที่มาจากการดราฟต์นั่นก็คือ Stephen Curry Klay Thompson Draymond Green Kevon Looney ผู้เล่น4คนนี้เป็นผู้เล่นหลักที่มาจากการดราฟต์ของ Golden State Warriors นะคะไม่ได้มาจากการเทรดหรือเซ็นสัญญาแต่อย่างใดแต่นั่นก็ทำให้ทีม Golden State Warriors ในตอนนี้เป็นทีมที่แข็งแกร่งที่สุดและในฤดูกาล ณ์ที่จะถึงนี้เชื่อว่าหลายๆคนยังคงยกให้ Golden State Warriors เป็นทีมเต็งแชมป์อยู่ดีค่ะเรียกได้ว่า Golden State Warriors กลับมาสู่ยุคครองลีกของตัวเองหรือว่า Dynasty ทีมอีกครั้งเป็นที่เรียบร้อยกว่าที่ทีม Golden State Warriors จะกลับมาอยู่จุดนี้ได้นะคะเพื่อนๆพวกเขาผ่านอะไรมามากมายเลยค่ะทั้งประสบความสำเร็จแล้วก็ล้มเหลวผ่านอะไรมาบ้างเดี๋ยววันนี้เรามาฟังประวัติการเดินทางของทีม Golden State Warriors ที่เริ่มตั้งแต่การดราฟต์ของ Stephen Curry มาจนถึงยุค Dynasty ทีมค่ะ
The Golden State Warriors select Stephen Curry from Davidson College. The 6'3" junior guard out of Davidson, quite simply, is the best shooter in the draft.
He's going to have to improve his decision making a little bit with the ball in his hands, and his shot selection has got to get a little bit better. He's got really deep range. It goes beyond NBA range.
จุดเริ่มต้นของยุคครองลีกค่ะเริ่มกันที่การดราฟต์ Stephen Curry เข้ามาร่วมทีมใน NBA Draft ปี 2009 ถูกเลือกเป็นอันดับที่ 7 ค่ะเขาถูกเลือกรองลงมาจาก Thai League Events Curry ถูกโหวตให้เป็น Rookie of the Month ค่ะหรือว่า Rookie ยอดเยี่ยมประจำเดือนถึง 3 ครั้งในฤดูกาลถึงแม้ว่าจะถูกโหวตให้เป็น Rookie ยอดเยี่ยมประจำเดือนถึง 3 ครั้งแต่ Stephen Curry ก็ไม่ได้ถูกโหวตให้เป็น Rookie of the Year เขาได้คะแนนเป็นอันดับที่ 2 ค่ะและคนที่ได้ Rookie of the Year ในปี 2009 นั่นก็คือ Thai League Events ค่ะฤดูกาลแรกของ Stephen Curry จบด้วยสถิติชนะ 26 แพ้ 56 เกมไม่ได้เข้าสู่ Playoff นะคะตัว Stephen Curry เองเนี่ยมีค่าเฉลี่ยอยู่ที่ 17.5 คะแนนค่ะ 5.9 Assist แล้วก็ 4 รีบาวด์ลงสนามทำการแข่งขันไปทั้งหมด 80 เกมต่อมาในปี 2010 โจเลคอบได้ซื้อทีม Golden State Warriors ต่อจากคริสโคฮานในราคา 450 ล้านเหรียญในวันแถลงข่าวนะคะเลคอบได้ให้สัมภาษณ์เอาไว้ว่ามันเป็นความปรารถนาของเขาเลยนะคะที่จะนำทีม Golden State Warriors กลับสู่ความยิ่งใหญ่แล้วก็สร้างองค์กรที่จะพาไปสู่แชมป์ทำให้ทุกคนใน Bay Area เนี่ยภาคภูมิใจในปี 2011 ค่ะ Golden State Warriors ได้ draft Klay Thompson ใน draft อันดับที่ 11 การเลือก Klay เข้ามามีหลายฝ่ายนะคะที่ไม่เห็นด้วยกับการ draft Klay Thompson ค่ะเพราะเนื่องจากตอนนั้นค่ะ Golden State Warriors มีทั้ง Stephen Curry แล้วก็ Monta Ellis อยู่แล้วแต่แล้วค่ะในที่สุดเนี่ยก็มีการเทรด Monta Ellis ไป Milwaukee Bucks แลกกับ Andrew Bogut นะคะจากนั้นในปี 2012 Golden State Warriors ก็ได้ draft Draymond Green กันในอันดับที่ 35 เริ่มฤดูกาลปี 2012 ถึง 2013 Stephen Curry แล้วก็ Klay Thompson เนี่ยเล่นเข้าขากันมากขึ้นเรื่อยๆเลยค่ะ Curry เริ่มมีความพยายามยิง 3 คะแนนต่อเกมเพิ่มมากขึ้นนะคะจาก 4.7 ครั้งต่อเกมใน 3 ฤดูกาลแรกเนี่ยเพิ่มมาเป็น 7.7 ครั้งต่อเกมในฤดูกาลปี 2012-2013 ค่ะทั้ง Stephen Curry แล้วก็ Klay Thompson เนี่ยกลายเป็นคู่หู 3 แต้มที่หลายต่อหลายทีมเนี่ยต่างพากันหาวิธีการหยุดคู่หู 2 คนนี้นะคะจนกระทั่งเขาได้รับฉายาค่ะว่า Splash Brothers จากการเล่นที่สุดยอดของคู่หู Splash Brothers บวกกับ Draymond Green ค่ะทำให้พวกเขาจบฤดูกาลที่สถิติชนะ 47 เกมแพ้ 35 เกมและเป็นครั้งแรกค่ะที่พวกเขาผ่านเข้าสู่ Playoff ปี 2014 Golden State Warriors ได้ดึงตัว Steve Kerr เข้ามาเป็นหัวหน้าโค้ชนะคะเขาเคยเป็นอดีตผู้เล่น NBA เคยคว้าแชมป์ร่วมกับ Michael Jordan ซึ่งตอนนั้นค่ะเขาทำหน้าที่เป็นนักวิเคราะห์ของ TNT สื่อยักษ์ใหญ่ของ NBA ในตอนนั้นเนี่ย Steve Kerr มีทางเลือกระหว่าง Golden State Warriors หรือ New York Knicks ค่ะ New York Knicks เนี่ยมีอดีตโค้ชของเขาด้วยนะคะ Phil Jackson เป็นประธานทีมอยู่แต่อย่างไรก็ตามค่ะ Steve Kerr ก็เลือกที่จะเป็นหัวหน้าโค้ชให้กับทาง Golden State Warriors เขาต้องการที่จะช่วยเพิ่มศักยภาพการเล่นที่สุดยอดของนักกีฬาและก็ชอบที่จะทำงานกับ Golden State Warriors ค่ะในฤดูกาลปี 2014-2015 เดวิดลีได้รับอาการบาดเจ็บทำให้ Steve Kerr เนี่ยต้องให้ Draymond Green นะคะขยับเข้ามายืนเป็นผู้เล่น5ตัวแรกและใครจะไปคิดล่ะคะว่าการเปลี่ยนแปลงในครั้งนี้จะเกิดผลดีเกินคาดสำหรับ Golden State Warriors ไม่มีใครคิดเลยนะคะว่าความสามารถของ Draymond Green เนี่ยจะช่วยยกระดับทีมได้ขนาดนี้ไม่ว่าจะเป็นการป้องกันการส่งบอล Draymond Green สามารถทำมันได้อย่างน่าเหลือเชื่อค่ะเขาถูกเลื่อนขึ้นมาเป็นตัวจริงถาวรค่ะและทุกๆคนเนี่ยก็มองว่า Draymond Green นี่แหละค่ะคือหนึ่งในจุดเปลี่ยนที่สำคัญของ Golden State Warriors ที่จะพาไปสู่ความยิ่งใหญ่ไปสู่ยุคครองลีกได้เลยทีเดียวจุดรุ่งเรืองของยุคครองลีกค่ะ ฤดูกาล 2014-2015 Golden State Warriors จบฤดูกาลด้วยสถิติชนะ 67 แพ้ 15 เคอรีได้รางวัล MVP ซึ่งเป็นคนแรกของทีม Golden State Warriors เลยนะคะนับตั้งแต่วิลแชมเบอร์เลนค่ะแล้วก็เป็นครั้งแรกในรอบ 40 ปีที่ Golden State Warriors สามารถเข้าสู่ NBA Finals ได้เจอกับ Cleveland Cavaliers ที่นำโดย LeBron James Steve Kerr ใช้แผนที่เรียกว่า Jet Lineup ทำให้ Golden State Warriors ที่สามารถปิดซีรีส์ในเกมที่ 6 ค่ะคว้าแชมป์ NBA ได้สำเร็จอังเดร อิกูดาลาได้รับรางวัล Finals MVP Steve Kerr กลายเป็นโค้ชมือใหม่คนแรกค่ะหรือว่า Rookie Coach นะคะที่สามารถคว้าแชมป์ได้ตั้งแต่ Pat Riley ค่ะในปี 1981 ถึง 82 ปิดฤดูกาลปี 2014-2015 คู่หู Splash Brothers ยังคงยิง 3 คะแนนรวมๆกันแล้ว 525 ครั้งถือว่าเป็นคู่หูดูโอที่ยิง 3 คะแนนมากที่สุดในประวัติศาสตร์ของ NBA แล้วค่ะ Golden State Warriors ในฤดูกาลปี 2015-2016 ค่ะพวกเขาได้สร้างประวัติศาสตร์หน้าใหม่ค่ะสร้างสถิติชนะ 73 แพ้ 9 ในฤดูกาลปกติถือเป็นการทำลายสถิติของชิคาโกบูลส์นะคะในปีฤดูกาล 1995-96 ที่ทำเอาไว้ที่ชนะ 72 แพ้ 10 สเตฟาน เคอรีได้รับรางวัล MVP ปีที่ 2 ติดต่อกันในรอบชิงแชมป์สายฝั่งตะวันตกค่ะ Golden State Warriors เจอกับ OKC Thunder ถึงแม้ว่า Warriors เนี่ยจะโดน OKC Thunder นำไปก่อน 3-1 แต่พวกเขาก็สามารถพลิกกลับมาชนะและก็สามารถผ่านเข้าสู่รอบ NBA Finals ได้
Was unreal, one of the more dominant first quarters you'll ever see in a playoff game.
ในรอบ NBA Finals พวกเขายังต้องเจอกับคู่ปรับเก่าค่ะอย่าง Cleveland Cavaliers แต่ก็ยังคงนำทีมโดย LeBron James และก็ Kyrie Irving Golden State Warriors สามารถขึ้นนำซีรีส์ไปก่อน 3-1 และก็พร้อมที่จะปิดซีรีส์เตรียมรับถ้วยแชมป์ค่ะแต่พวกเขาก็ต้องช็อกรวมไปถึงแฟนๆทีมด้วยนะคะช็อกแบบสุดขีดเพราะว่า Cleveland Cavaliers สามารถกลับมาชนะได้ 3 เกมรวดและก็คว้าแชมป์ NBA ไปครองหลังจากที่พวกเขาแพ้ให้กับ Cleveland Cavaliers ฤดูกาลถัดมาค่ะฤดูกาลที่ 2016-2017 พวกเขาได้สร้างข่าวสะเทือนไปทั้งวงการ NBA นะคะลีกในตอนนั้นน่ะไม่เหมือนเดิมอีกต่อไปค่ะเนื่องจาก Golden State Warriors ได้เซ็นสัญญาเอาซุปเปอร์สตาร์เควิน ดูแรนท์ที่เพิ่งแพ้ให้กับพวกเขานี่แหละค่ะในรอบชิงสายนะคะตอนที่อยู่กับ OKC เข้าสู่ทีม Warriors ค่ะและ NBA Finals ในปีนี้ยังคงเป็นมวยคู่เดิมนะคะเป็น Golden State Warriors เจอกับ Cleveland Cavaliers ซึ่งเป็นฝ่าย Golden State Warriors ค่ะที่คว้าชัยชนะไป 4-1 คว้าแชมป์ NBA ได้สำเร็จฤดูกาล 2017-2018 นะคะ Golden State Warriors ต้องเจอปัญหาอาการบาดเจ็บของผู้เล่นทำให้จบฤดูกาลปกติพวกเขาชนะ 58 เกมอย่างไรก็ตามนี่ไม่ใช่ปัญหาพวกเขาสามารถผ่านเข้าสู่เพลย์ออฟได้และพวกเขาก็สามารถผ่านเข้าสู่รอบชิงชนะเลิศได้อีกครั้งค่ะทีมตรงข้ามยังคงเป็นทีมเดิมอย่าง Cleveland Cavaliers อีกนะคะนับว่าเป็นปีที่ 4 ติดต่อกันแล้วค่ะที่พวกเขาทั้ง2ทีมเนี่ยต้องมาเจอกันในรอบ NBA Finals แบบนี้และก็ยังคงเป็น Golden State Warriors ที่เป็นต่ออย่างชัดเจนค่ะทำให้พวกเขาเนี่ยกวาด Cleveland Cavaliers ไปเลยนะคะ 4-0 ได้แชมป์ NBA สมัยที่ 2 ติดต่อกันตูนยังคงจำความรู้สึกนั้นได้อย่างแม่นยำเลยค่ะในปีนั้นนะคะ NBA Finals เกม 4 ที่ Cleveland เนี่ยพวกเราก็อยู่ในสนามด้วยค่ะขาลงของยุคครองลีกฤดูกาลปี 2018-2019 ถือเป็นฤดูกาลที่ท้าทายสำหรับทีม Golden State Warriors มากพวกเขาสามารถเข้าสู่รอบ NBA Finals อีกครั้งและก็กลายเป็นทีมแรกในประวัติศาสตร์ของ NBA ที่สามารถเข้ารอบ NBA Finals ได้ 5 ปีติดต่อกันแต่ NBA Finals ปีนี้เหมือนกับเป็นหายนะของ Golden State Warriors เลยนะคะคู่ชิงปีนี้ของ Warriors นั่นก็คือ Toronto Raptors ค่ะที่มี Kawhi Leonard แล้วก็ Kyle Lowry Warriors ต้องเจอกับเรื่องที่น่าปวดหัวในรอบ Finals ระหว่างที่ทั้งคู่กำลังสู้กันอย่างดุเดือดนะคะเควิน ดูแรนท์เกิดอาการบาดเจ็บเอ็นร้อยหวายฉีกค่ะแล้วก็เคลย์ ทอมสันนะคะก็เกิดอาการบาดเจ็บเอ็นไขว้หน้าฉีกเช่นกันทำให้ทั้งคู่ไม่สามารถแข่งขันต่อไปได้เหลือเพียงสเตฟาน เคอรีคนเดียวเท่านั้นค่ะทำให้พวกเขาเนี่ยไม่สามารถต่อสู้กับ Toronto Raptors ได้แล้วก็เป็นฝ่ายพ่ายแพ้ไปในที่สุดแชมป์ปี 2018-2019 ตกเป็นของ Toronto Raptors หลังจากจบฤดูกาลนะคะเควิน ดูแรนท์ก็ไปเซ็นสัญญา 4 ปีกับ Brooklyn Nets แต่เพื่อไม่ให้ Golden State Warriors ต้องเสีย KD ไปโดยเปล่าประโยชน์ค่ะ Warriors เนี่ยได้ส่งเควิน ดูแรนท์พร้อมกับสิทธิ์ดราฟต์รอบแรกปี 2020 เพื่อแลกกับ D'Angelo Russellฤดูกาลปี 2019-2020 เป็นฤดูกาลที่ตกต่ำสำหรับ Golden State Warriors มากๆในปีนี้พวกเขาได้ดราฟต์ Jordan Poole ค่ะดาวรุ่งอันดับที่ 28 นะคะที่ค่อยๆเริ่มประกายแสงขึ้นเรื่อยๆ ในฤดูกาลนี้ค่ะเคลย์ ทอมสันเนี่ยต้องพักจากอาการบาดเจ็บยาวไปถึง2 ปีเลยทีเดียวและแย่ไปกว่านั้นค่ะเคอรี่ก็มาเจ็บข้อมือหักอีกในวันที่30 ตุลาคมทำให้เขาต้องเข้ารับการผ่าตัดค่ะซึ่งต้องใช้เวลาพักไปอีกถึง3 เดือนเลยนะคะและก่อนที่จะผ่านเส้นตายการเทรดค่ะพวกเขาได้มีการเทรดแดนเจอร์ รัสเซลที่ดูแล้วจะไม่เข้ากับระบบของทีมสักเท่าไหร่และกับแอนดรูว์ วิกกินส์ของมินนิโซตา ทิมเบอร์วูฟส์และในฤดูกาลนี้ค่ะเนื่องจากลีกได้ถูกระงับนะคะจากการระบาดของโควิด -19 จึงได้มีการจัดการแข่งขันแบบ NBA Bubbles ค่ะมี22 ทีมเท่านั้นที่ได้รับเชิญและ Golden State Warriors ไม่ได้ถูกรับเชิญนะคะเนื่องจากคะแนนของทีมเนี่ยไม่ถึงเกณฑ์ที่ทาง NBA กำหนดไว้จบฤดูกาลด้วยสถิติแย่ที่สุดของลีกค่ะชนะ15 เกมแพ้ถึง50 เกม
The Golden State Warriors select James Wiseman from the University of Memphis
ในฤดูกาลปี 2020-2021 พวกเขาได้ดราฟต์อันดับที่2ค่ะโดยพวกเขาดราฟต์เจมส์ไวส์แมนเข้าสู่ทีมเคลย์ ทอมสันยังคงไม่สามารถลงแข่งขันได้ทั้งฤดูกาล Golden State Warriors จบฤดูกาลปกติด้วยสถิติชนะ39แพ้33สามารถเข้าสู่รอบเพลย์อินแต่พวกเขาเนี่ยก็แพ้ให้กับ LA Lakers และก็ Memphis Grizzlies ตกรอบไปฤดูกาลนี้เคอรี่มีค่าเฉลี่ยอยู่ที่32 แต้มต่อเกมแต่ก็ไม่สามารถพาทีมเข้าสู่เพลย์ออฟได้
And Clay down the lane will put it up and in! On the whole city of Cleveland just now. Just put Lamar Stevens and Laurie Market in the basket.
การกลับมาครองลีกค่ะเริ่มฤดูกาลปี 2021-2022 ใน NBA Draft ปี 2021 ค่ะ Golden State Warriors ได้ Draft อันดับ 7 นั่นก็คือโจนาธาน คูมิงกาและก็ Draft โมเสส มูดี้ค่ะ Draft อันดับที่ 14 เข้ามาสู่ทีมหลังจากพวกเขาไม่ผ่านเข้าสู่ NBA Playoff ถึง 2 ปีหลายๆคนคิดเลยค่ะว่านี่ก็คงจะหมดยุคของ Golden State Warriors แล้วแต่ว่าเปล่าเลยนะคะไม่ใช่แบบนั้นเลยค่ะพวกเขาสามารถกลับมายิ่งใหญ่ได้อีกครั้งหนึ่งค่ะด้วยเวลาเพียงไม่กี่ปีพวกเขาสามารถทะลุเข้าสู่รอบ NBA Finals ได้สำเร็จเข้ารอบไปเจอกับ Boston Celtics ที่นำทีมโดยเจสัน เททัม เจเรน บราวน์ มาคัส สมาร์ทนะคะและก็เป็นฝ่าย Golden State Warriors ค่ะที่เป็นฝ่ายชนะไป4-2เป็นการคว้า4แชมป์ในรอบ8ปีเลยค่ะด้วยฟอร์มของสเตฟาน เคอรีที่สุดยอดยิ่งกว่าปีไหนๆและการกลับมาของเคลย์ ทอมสันถึงแม้ว่าเขาจะไม่ได้ยิงยับแบบเมื่อก่อนนะคะแต่ก็ถือว่าช่วยทีมได้มากเลยทีเดียวเดรมอนด์ กรีนค่ะถือว่าเป็นหัวใจสำคัญเกมรับของ Golden State Warriors เขาคือคนที่คุมเกมรับทำให้ Warriors สามารถเล่นเกมป้องกันได้อย่างเต็มที่และก็ออลสตาร์ปีล่าสุดอย่างแอนดรูว์ วิกกินส์ที่คอยรับหน้าที่ประกบตัวทำแต้มของฝ่ายตรงข้ามแล้วเขาก็ทำได้ดีมากๆเป็นตัวสำคัญของ Golden State Warriors เลยนะคะนี่ยังไม่รวมการเล่นของเหล่าผู้เล่นสำรองค่ะไม่ว่าจะเป็นจอร์แดน พูลที่ก็ถือว่าได้วิชาของสเตฟาน เคอรีมาเต็มๆเลยค่ะแกรี่ เพตัน เดอะเซคันด์แล้วก็คนอื่นๆทุกคนที่ทำหน้าที่ของตัวเองได้อย่างสุดยอดจริงๆและก็ต้องไม่ลืมนะคะที่จะให้เครดิตกับผลงานอันน่าทึ่งของโค้ชและก็ทีมผู้บริหารค่ะที่ทำให้พวกเขาสามารถประสบความสำเร็จได้อีกครั้งเรามารอติดตามชมผลงานของ Golden State Warriors กันต่อไปนะคะและนี่ก็คือไทม์ไลน์ของ Golden State Warriors ในการกลับมาครองลีกอีกครั้งนึงค่ะขอบคุณเพื่อนๆทุกคนมากเลยนะคะที่รับชมกันมาถึงตอนนี้ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
สวัสดีครับชาวเพื่อนหมีทุกคนวันนี้เพื่อนหมีจะมาเล่านิยายแปลไทยเรื่องเกิดใหม่ทั้งทีก็กลายเป็นสลามไปซะแล้วนะครับเนื้อหาในคลิปนี้จะอยู่ในนิยายเล่มที่17ของต่างประเทศนะครับและหากเนื้อหาข้อมูลมีส่วนไหนที่เพื่อนหมีแปลผิดไปเพื่อนหมีก็ต้องกราบขออภัยทุกคนไว้ก่อนด้วยเลยนะครับก่อนอื่นเพื่อนหมีต้องฝากเพื่อนๆทุกคน กดไลค์และกด Subscribe เพื่อเป็นกำลังใจให้เพื่อนหมีกันด้วยนะครับและถ้าทุกคนพร้อมกันแล้ว
จะรออะไรกันล่ะไปกันเลยสิวะ
เนื้อเรื่องในคลิปนี้จะเล่าถึงเวลกินที่ออกตามหาเศษเสี้ยวดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่านะครับการเดินทางที่ต้องข้ามน้ำข้ามทะเลข้ามโลกข้ามดวงจันทร์ข้ามการข้ามเวลาไปยังโลกที่เธอไม่รู้จักในตอนที่เวลกินล่องลอยอยู่ภายในการเวลาที่ยาวนานเธอได้เผชิญหน้ากับตัวตนของตัวเองจนทำให้เธอได้บรรลุอัลติเมทสกิลราชันแห่งเพลิงศักดิ์สิทธิ์อัลติเมทสกิลราชันแห่งเพลิงศักดิ์สิทธิ์มีพลังในการตรวจหาดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าหรือตามเศษเสี้ยวดวงวิญญาณที่หายไปโดยอ้างอิงจากเศษเสี้ยวดวงวิญญาณที่เวลกินมีอยู่อย่างน้อยนิดเมื่อได้อัลติเมทสกิลนั้นมาเวลกินก็ออกค้นหาชิ้นส่วนดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าอันเป็นที่รักของเธอได้ไม่ว่าพวกเขาจะอยู่ไกลหรือใกล้มากเพียงใดแม้กระทั่งการเวลาก็ไม่อาจจะบดบังอำนาจของการตามหาของมันได้สิ่งที่เธอต้องทำเพียงแค่กระโดดแบบจัมเปอร์ไปตามมิติต่างๆเท่านั้นการใช้ความสามารถของอัลติเมทสกิลสามารถไปได้ไกลเท่าไหร่ก็ได้โดยไม่เกี่ยวกับเวลานั่นจึงอาจจะมองเหมือนเธอแค่เคลื่อนที่ด้วยความเร็วเท่านั้นแต่ที่จริงเธออาจจะมุ่งไปยังอดีตหรืออนาคตแล้วค่อยกลับมาณสถานที่และเวลาเดียวกับที่เธอจากไปก็เป็นได้นั่นจึงเป็นเหตุผลที่เวลกินออกตามหาลูโดล่าสถานที่แรกที่เธอไปก็คือทวีปที่เต็มไปด้วยดวงดาวซึ่งอารยธรรมยังอยู่ในช่วงเริ่มต้นพร้อมกับชนเผ่าที่มีผมสีบรอนซ์และมีเด็กหนุ่มผมสีบรอนซ์คนหนึ่งที่มีดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าอยู่ในตัวของเขาเด็กหนุ่มคนนั้นเป็นนักล่าพวกเขาตั้งลกลากอยู่ในหุบเขาที่มีแม่น้ำใหญ่แล้วในที่สุดเวลกินก็ได้เข้าช่วยเหลือพวกเขาเธอช่วยนำฝนและพิชิตแม่น้ำใหญ่จนทำให้แผ่นดินอุดมสมบูรณ์จากนั้นเธอก็นำพาพวกเขาให้ทำการเกษตรแทนการออกล่าแหล่งอาหารจึงเพิ่มขึ้นอย่างมากปากท้องอิ่มชุมชนมั่นคงทำให้หมู่บ้านรอบๆเริ่มเกรงกลัวเป็นธรรมดาที่ผู้ที่โดดเด่นจะตกเป็นเป้าหมายดังนั้นเวลกินจึงเตรียมแผนการต่อไปเธอทำเตาหลอมอุณหภูมิสูงพอที่จะหลอมโลหะให้แก่ชนเผ่าซึ่งเรียกว่าเป็นการพัฒนาอย่างมากในยุคนั้นสิ่งนั้นทำให้พวกเขาข้ามยุคสำลิดไปจากยุคหินจึงมุ่งสู่ยุคเหล็กแทนจากนั้นก็มีการตกลงกันว่าหมู่บ้านรอบๆจะถูกรวมเข้าด้วยกันแล้วก็ตั้งเป็นอาณาจักรที่มีนามว่าอาณาจักรอาเซียโดยมีเด็กชายผมบรอนซ์ที่โตเป็นหนุ่มนั่งตำแหน่งราชาแล้วบัลลังก์ก็ถูกส่งต่อไปยังลูกหลานเวลกินจึงหยุดช่วยเหลือพวกเขานับแต่นั้นมาเวลกินไม่มีเหตุผลที่จะช่วยเหลือโอรสและหลานของราชาเนื่องจากพวกเขาไม่มีร่องรอยของเศษเสี้ยวดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าเธอจะช่วยก็ได้ หลานของราชาเนื่องจากพวกเขาไม่มีร่องรอยของเศษเสี้ยวดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าเธอจะช่วยก็ได้แต่ไม่ทำเนื่องจากราชาต้องการให้ลูกหลานของเขาเป็นอิสระเวลกินก็เคารพในการตัดสินใจนั้นชายผู้มาจากเผ่าคนเถื่อนในตอนนั้นตอนนี้เขาได้กลายเป็นราชาองค์แรกของอาณาจักรอาเซียผู้ก่อตั้งอารยธรรมแม่น้ำใหญ่ราชาปฏิบัติต่อเวลกินเหมือนกับเธอเป็นเทพธิดาของเขาแต่เขาไม่เคยโอบกอดเวลกินไว้ในอ้อมแขนเลยสักครั้งซึ่งเวลกินก็โอเคกับเรื่องนั้นหน้าที่ของเวลกินคือเพียงแค่เฝ้าดูคนรักของราชาให้กำเนิดบุตรสืบทอดสายเลือดดังนั้นเวลกินจึงต้องรอวิญญาณอีกเสี้ยวหนึ่งที่อยู่กับหลานของเขาแล้ววันเวลาก็ผ่านไปในความเจริญรุ่งเรืองของบ้านเมืองชายหนุ่มในตอนนั้นกลายเป็นชายชราที่รอคอยความตายก่อนจะสิ้นใจเขายังได้อวยพรให้เวลกินแล้วเขาก็ลาโลกไปพร้อมกับมอบดวงวิญญาณให้แก่เธอแล้วเวลกินก็ได้สิ่งที่ต้องการแต่มันก็เป็นเพียงแค่เศษเล็กๆเธอรู้ว่าการเดินทางของเธอเพิ่งจะเริ่มต้นขึ้นว่าแล้วเธอก็จัมเปอร์ไปยังจุดหมายต่อไปส่วนอาณาจักรแห่งนี้ก็ยังดำเนินต่อไปพวกเขาทำสงครามเพื่อยึดครองดินแดนรอบๆผู้คนที่เกิดก่อนถ่ายทอดเรื่องราวให้ลูกหลานฟังในแบบฉบับของชีวประวัติจนกลายเป็นตำนานในที่สุดแล้วเวลกินก็ถูกนับถือในฐานะเทพธิดาแห่งการสร้างสรรค์และผู้ควบคุมเปลวไฟเวลกินได้พบเจอและการจากลาในหลายๆครั้งทั้งหมดนี้ทำให้เธอเข้าใจว่าเวลดานาวาไม่ได้สร้างแค่โลกเดียวแล้วอันที่จริงโลกแต่ละโลกก็มีเพียงหนึ่งเดียวมันไม่ใช่โลกคู่ขนานหรือมัลติเวิร์สมันมีแค่โลกอื่นๆเท่านั้นพูดง่ายๆคือมีมนุษย์ต่างดาวอยู่นั่นเองแต่เวลกินก็ไม่เคยคิดเลยว่าโลกจะแตกต่างกันมากขนาดนี้พวกเขาถูกควบคุมด้วยความเชื่อและกฎหมายที่แตกต่างกันโดยสิ้นเชิงและมันดูไม่มีเหตุผลมันเป็นโลกวัตถุภายในโลกของวิญญาณที่ยิ่งใหญ่ของอารยธรรมต่างๆจากโลกที่คุ้นเคยซึ่งมีดาบและเวทมนต์เป็นพื้นฐานสู่โลกที่เวทมนต์ไม่มีอยู่จริงและไม่สามารถใช้ได้นอกจากนี้ยังมีโลกที่หายากซึ่งอารยธรรมทางวิทยาศาสตร์ได้พัฒนาและมนุษยชาติได้กลายเป็นหุ่นยนต์ไปมีโลกที่อ่อนแอมากๆที่เพียงแค่มังกรเผลอปล่อยพลังออกมาดวงดาวมันก็จะหายไปเลยและมีโลกที่ลกล้างที่ทูตสวรรค์และปีศาจเปรียบได้กับจอมมารที่ลืมตาตื่นเวลกินได้เดินทางไปยังโลกเหล่านั้นแต่ทั้งหมดไม่ใช่ความตั้งใจของเธอเพียงแค่ได้รับคำแนะนำจากอัลติเมทสกิลของเธอเท่านั้นมีอารยธรรมหลายระดับที่แตกต่างกันและเวลกินไม่มีทางคาดเดาได้เลยว่าเธออยู่ในมิติหรือช่วงเวลาใดนอกจากนี้มันยังไม่มีจักรวาลคู่ขนานที่ซ้อนทับกันจึงเป็นไปไม่ได้ที่เอนทิตี้เดียวกันจะทับซ้อนกันบนไทม์ไลน์เดียวกัน งงละสิเพื่อนมีก็งงเหมือนกันถ้าจะกล่าวอีกในหนึ่งก็คือเพียงแค่เราเคยไปที่นั่นครั้งหนึ่งแล้วใช่ว่าเราจะสามารถกลับไปที่เดิมได้อีกครั้งกลับไปโลกเดิมมาได้แต่กลับไปณเวลาเดิมน่ะไม่ได้นะครับดังนั้นเวลกินจึงจดจำผู้ครอบครองเศษดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าในรูปแบบต่างๆไม่ว่าจะเป็นผู้บัญชาการกองเรือของโลกระหว่างดวงดาวน่าจะอยู่ในเรื่องสตาร์วอร์นะครับหรือไม่ก็รัฐมนตรีของประเทศเล็กๆในโลกของดาบและเวทมนต์โลกนี้น่าจะเป็นโลกของเกมออฟทรอนนะครับหรือนักต้มตุ๋นที่หายากในโลกที่ไม่มีดาบและเวทมนต์โลกนี้น่าจะเป็นโลกของอาชญากรปล้นโลกนะครับหรือนักวิทยาศาสตร์ผู้น่าสงสารในโลกอารยะสงสัยจะเป็นดร.สลามกับหนูน้อยอาราเล่เวลกินที่กระโดดไปมักจะถูกนำทางหรือถูกเรียกด้วยดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าในตอนที่ดวงวิญญาณนั้นอยู่ในสถานการณ์วิกฤตบางคนเสียชีวิตตั้งแต่เด็กเพราะเขาไม่สามารถขอความช่วยเหลือใครได้มันเป็นเรื่องที่น่าเศร้าแต่เวลกินเชื่อว่ามันเป็นชะตากรรมและไม่จำเป็นต้องไปค่ำครวญเสียใจเพราะเมื่อตายดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าก็จะมารวมกันโดยรวดเร็วเวลกินไม่ได้รีบร้อนที่จะให้เหล่าลูโดล่าทั้งหลายไปคุยกับรากมะม่วงมันเป็นความสุขของเธอที่จะได้เฝ้ามองลูโดล่าในหลายๆเวอร์ชันเธอเข้าใจดีว่าสายเลือดนั้นไร้ความหมายแม้แต่ลักษณะ างกายภาพก็ยังไม่มีความหมายบางคนมีผมสีเข้มบางคนมีผมสีแดงบางคนผมสีทนได้แต่พวกเขาทั้งหมดก็เป็นลูโดล่าและมันจะเป็นแบบนั้นต่อไปในอีกหลายๆดวงที่เวลกินจะได้พบเจอชิ้นส่วนของดวงวิญญาณที่เธอรวบรวมได้เติบโตขึ้นในขณะที่มีปริมาณมากพอดูสัญชาตญาณของเวลกินจึงบอกว่าเหลือเศษดวงวิญญาณอยู่อีกเพียงไม่กี่ชิ้นครั้งหน้าที่เธอจัมเปอร์คงจะเป็นครั้งสุดท้ายแล้วละว่าแล้วเวลกินก็กระโดดข้ามมิติมุ่งสู่โลกที่เธอได้รับเรียกจากดวงวิญญาณของลูโดล่าแล้วก็จบตอนที่ 5 ของนิยายแปลเองเรื่องเกิดใหม่ทั้งทีก็กลายเป็นสลามไปซะแล้วนะครับหากข้อมูลมีข้อผิดพลาดประการใดเพื่อนหมีก็ต้องกราบขออภัยทุกคนเอาไว้ด้วยนะครับสามารถคอมเมนต์ติชม
you